Samuel Whitaker has been dead 6 weeks. Those 7 words shattered Amelia Carter right there on the empty platform of Red Hollow. A wedding dress folded uselessly in her arms, and 3,000 miles of railroad track behind her, leading nowhere. No husband. No home. No money for the next train out. Just a woman abandoned by fate itself alone as the sun dropped toward the hills, until a stranger on a dark horse rode straight out of the dust, knelt before her, without a word of judgment, and whispered 4 words no man had ever meant as fiercely, "I will protect you." If stories of broken women and unbreakable cowboys speak to your heart, subscribe now and stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. The station master said it twice, as if repeating it might soften the blow. "Samuel Whitaker died 6 weeks ago, ma'am. Fever took him. I'm real sorry you had to hear it this way." Amelia didn't move. She stood there with her gloved hands wrapped so tightly around the handle of her suitcase that her knuckles went white beneath the leather. "That's not possible," she said. "I received a letter from him 3 weeks ago." The old man shook his head slowly. "Then somebody's been writing letters that ain't his to write." The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Amelia had crossed a continent on the strength of those letters. She had read them so many times the ink had begun to fade from the oil of her fingers. Samuel Whitaker, rancher widower, of no children. A man who wrote about cattle drives and open sky, and a house with an empty chair at the table that he hoped someday she would fill. "He can't be dead," she whispered. "He wrote to me. He told me the wedding would be small. He told me—" Her voice broke. The station master looked down at his boots, unwilling to meet her eyes. "I buried men who die of fever every summer, Miss Carter. I ain't in the business of lying about it." Amelia sat down hard on the wooden bench because her legs would not hold her another second. She stared at the tracks stretching out toward the horizon, the same tracks that had carried her here with a heart full of foolish hope, and she felt something inside her crack straight down the middle. 3 months of letters. 3 months of believing that somewhere out west a decent man was waiting to give her a life worth living. All of it gone in a single sentence from a stranger who didn't even know her name until 30 seconds ago. "Is there someone I can send for?" the station master asked. "Family. Someone who might take you in." Amelia laughed a broken, humorless sound. "There's no one," she said. "That's why I came." She thought of her mother's grave back in Virginia, her father's debts, the years she'd spent taking in sewing work just to keep a roof over her head, watching every eligible man in the county marry someone with land, someone with money, someone who wasn't the daughter of a man who'd gambled away the family's good name. Samuel Whitaker's letters had been the first kind words a man had spoken to her in 5 years, and now he was 6 weeks in the ground. "The next train east doesn't come through until Thursday," the station master said gently. 3 days from now." 3 days. Amelia looked down at her suitcase at the small amount of money folded inside her coin purse. Money she'd counted carefully to last exactly as far as her new life, and not 1 mile further. "I don't have enough for a hotel for 3 nights, she said quietly. The station master's face tightened with the particular discomfort of a man who has no solution to offer. "There's a boarding house in town. Mrs. Pratchett runs it. Might could talk to her." Amelia nodded, though nodding took more strength than she thought she had left. The sun was already dipping toward the western hills, staining the sky the color of a fresh bruise, and the last of the other passengers had scattered into wagons and greetings and homes that were waiting for them. No one was waiting for Amelia Carter. She sat alone on that bench as the platform emptied, the station master retreating into his little office, the world moving on around her as if a woman's entire future hadn't just collapsed in the space of 1 sentence. That was when the man approached. He wore a suit too fine for a frontier town, his mustache oiled and curled at the ends, his smile arriving a full second before anything in his eyes did. "Now this is a shame," he said, stopping in front of her bench without being invited. "Pretty young woman like you all alone out here." Amelia straightened, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I'm fine, thank you." "Didn't say you weren't fine." He tipped his hat, though the gesture felt more like a performance than a courtesy. "Name's Otis Grady. I do a bit of business around these parts. Couldn't help but overhear your troubles." "It's not your concern, Mr. Grady. Could be, though." He crouched slightly, bringing his face too close to hers. "A woman with no money and nowhere to sleep, that's a hard situation. I got a room. I got means. Wouldn't cost you nothing but a little friendly company." Amelia's stomach turned to ice. She understood exactly what he was offering and exactly what he expected in return. "I said no." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, sharp enough to draw a flicker of irritation across his oiled face. "No need to be unkind about it." Grady's smile thinned. "Out here, ma'am, a woman without a husband and without a coin to her name doesn't have a whole lot of choices. You might want to think on that before you go turning down decent offers." He reached out as if to take her hand, and Amelia recoiled so hard she nearly toppled off the bench. "Don't touch me." Now. She said don't touch her. The voice came from behind Grady, low and even, carrying the particular calm of a man who did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. Grady spun around. A tall figure sat atop a dark horse just beyond the platform's edge, hat pulled low, a rifle resting easy across the saddle, in a way that suggested it had been there a long time and would stay there a long time more. "This ain't your business, Bennett," Grady said, though the confidence had drained clean out of his voice. "Made it my business the second I saw you crowding a lady who told you to back off." Cole Bennett swung down off his horse in one smooth motion, boots hitting the platform with a sound of finality. He was taller than Grady, by half a head, with the kind of build that came from years of honest work rather than idle wealth, and eyes the color of storm clouds that fixed on Grady without a trace of doubt. "Get on," Cole said. "Before I decide this is more my business than it already is." Grady's jaw worked for a moment, weighing pride against the very real possibility of a beating. Pride lost. "Fine," he muttered, straightening his coat with exaggerated dignity. "Fine. She's not worth the trouble anyhow." He stalked off into the gathering dusk, and Amelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Cole watched Grady go until he disappeared around the corner of the depot. Then he turned back to Amelia, and something in his hard expression softened. He removed his hat. "Ma'am, you all right?" Amelia nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "I am now. Thank you." Cole studied her for a moment, the wedding dress folded carefully in her lap, the tear tracks drying on her cheeks, the way she sat like a woman bracing for the next blow to fall. "I don't know what happened to bring you here," he said quietly. "But no woman should be left alone at a train station when the sun goes down. Not in this territory." Amelia's throat tightened. "I was supposed to be married," she said. "Today, this afternoon. I came all the way from Virginia to marry a man named Samuel Whitaker." Something shifted behind Cole's eyes. "Whitaker's dead," he said. 6 weeks now. I just found out." Cole was quiet for a long moment, taking that in, and Amelia watched him do the arithmetic of the situation, the same way she had a stranger alone, no money, no family, no home. "You have somewhere to stay?" he asked finally. "The station master mentioned a boarding house." "Mrs. Pratchett's. She's decent, but she charges by the night, and from the look of that suitcase, I'd guess you counted every dollar you brought out here down to the coin." Amelia's cheeks burned. She hadn't expected to be read so easily by a stranger. "That's not your concern either, Mr. Abdi." "Bennett, Cole Bennett." He crouched down to her eye level, the same way Grady had, except nothing about it felt like a threat. "I own a ranch a few miles outside town. My housekeeper Margaret could use an extra pair of hands, and I got room for someone honest who needs a place to land while she figures out her next step." Amelia stared at him. "You're offering to take a stranger into your home. I'm offering a bed, a meal, and honest work if you want it. Nothing more than that." His voice stayed level, careful, as if he understood exactly how such an offer might sound to a woman who'd just been propositioned by another man not 5 minutes prior. "You don't owe me anything for it. And you're free to leave the second that train comes through Thursday, if that's what you want." Amelia looked out at the empty tracks, at the darkening sky, at the town she'd traveled thousands of miles to reach that had already shown her exactly how cruel it could be. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted, the words costing her more than she expected. Cole nodded slowly, as if he'd already known that, as if he'd seen it in her face the moment he rode up. "You don't have to face this alone," he said. "I will protect you." 4 simple words. Amelia would spend the rest of her life trying to explain why those particular words spoken by a stranger on a train platform had cracked something open inside her that 3 months of Samuel Whitaker's letters never had. Maybe it was that Cole Bennett wasn't promising her a future. He wasn't promising her a ring or a house or a name. He was only promising that she wouldn't be alone tonight. And after the day she'd had, that was enough to make her gather her suitcase and follow a stranger toward a horse she'd never ridden and a home she'd never seen. The ride out to the ranch took the better part of an hour, the sky bruising deeper into purple and black as they went. The only sound the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves against the packed dirt road. Amelia sat behind Cole, her hands gripping the edge of the saddle rather than his waist, maintaining every inch of propriety she could manage under the circumstances. "You don't talk much," she observed after nearly 20 minutes of silence. "Didn't figure you wanted conversation," Cole said. "Man loses a fiancée, gets accosted by Otis Grady all in the same afternoon. Didn't seem like the moment for small talk." "I never met Samuel," Amelia admitted. "Not once. We only wrote letters. Mail order arrangement then." "Yes." She hesitated. "Does that trouble you?" Cole was quiet for a beat. "Trouble me, no. Half the women in this territory came out here the same way. Man needs a wife, doesn't have time to go courting proper rights letters instead. Nothing shameful in that. Some people think differently. Some people got too much time on their hands to worry over other folks' business." His voice carried an edge that told her this was not merely a philosophical position, but a personal one. What matters is whether a person's honest. Everything else is just noise. Amelia found herself studying the back of his head, the set of his shoulders, trying to piece together what kind of man rode to the rescue of a stranger, and then dismissed his own kindness as though it were nothing at all. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." Cole didn't answer right away. "Lost someone myself once," he said finally. "Watched good people turn their backs on hard situations because it was easier than getting involved. Told myself if I ever saw someone in a spot like that, I wouldn't be the kind of man who rides on by." "Lost someone," Amelia repeated softly. "Your wife." Cole's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "That's a conversation for another day, Miss Carter." Amelia let the subject drop, understanding instinctively that she had brushed against something raw, something Cole Bennett kept locked away, the same careful way she kept her own grief locked away. They rode the rest of the way in a silence that felt strangely less lonely than the silence she'd sat in on that station bench. The ranch house came into view as a collection of warm yellow windows glowing against the deepening dark smoke curling up from the chimney, the shapes of outbuildings and corrals sprawling out beyond it. A woman appeared on the porch as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression sharpening with curiosity as she took in the unfamiliar figure riding behind Cole. "Cole Bennett, who in heaven's name is this?" "Margaret, this is Miss Amelia Carter. She's had a hard day. Going to need a room and some supper if you can manage it." Margaret's sharp eyes moved from Cole to Amelia, and back again, clearly cataloging every detail: the wedding dress folded over the suitcase, the tear-swollen eyes, the careful distance Amelia maintained from Cole, even as she dismounted. "Well," Margaret said slowly, "you'd best come inside then, before the mosquitoes carry you off." Amelia followed her up the porch steps, painfully aware of the 2 ranch hands who had emerged from the barn to watch the new arrival with open curiosity. One of them, a lanky young man with a crooked grin, elbowed the other. "Boss, bring home a stray." "Careful, Jasper," Cole said without turning around, though there was no real heat in it. "That's a lady you're talking about." Jasper's grin widened, but he said nothing further, and Amelia felt her face flush with embarrassment at being discussed like a piece of livestock that had wandered onto the property. Inside the ranch house was simple but warm. A large kitchen with a long wooden table, a fire crackling in the hearth, the smell of stew still lingering in the air from supper. Margaret set a bowl in front of Amelia, before she'd even finished sitting down. "Eat," Margaret said. "Whatever's troubling you can wait until your stomach's not empty." Amelia ate, and it was the first food she'd had since the previous morning, and somewhere between the first bite and the last, she felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, quiet and unstoppable. Margaret didn't fuss over her. She simply sat down across the table, folded her hands, and waited. "I came out here to marry a man I'd never met," Amelia finally said. "And he's been dead 6 weeks. I have no money, no family. Nothing waiting for me back home except more of the same nothing I left behind." "Sounds like a rough hand to be dealt," Margaret said simply. "Mr. Bennett said I could stay, work in exchange for a room." Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly, though whether in surprise or approval Amelia couldn't tell. "That's so. I don't want charity," Amelia added quickly. "I'm capable of honest work. Sewing, cooking, cleaning. I won't be a burden." Something in Margaret's expression shifted, a flicker of respect, breaking through her initial wariness. "Good," Margaret said. "Because I've been asking that man for a second pair of hands in this kitchen for 2 years, and he keeps telling me the ranch can't spare the wages. Guess fate had other plans." For the first time since the train had pulled into Red Hollow Station, Amelia felt something other than grief. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was perhaps the first thin thread of hope. That night alone in the small guest room Margaret had prepared, Amelia sat on the edge of the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to fall apart completely. She cried for Samuel Whitaker, a man she'd never met, but had somehow grieved as though she loved him, because his letters had represented the only future she'd allowed herself to imagine in 5 long years. She cried for her mother, dead 3 years now, who had begged Amelia's father not to gamble away their name and their land, and who had died with that debt still hanging over the family like a curse. She cried for the girl she used to be, the one who believed in things like fairness and second chances, and men who kept their promises, because that girl had died somewhere on the long train ride west, replaced by a woman who understood exactly how quickly the world could take everything from you. And she cried quietly for the strange and unexpected kindness of a stranger who had looked at her ruined life and decided without hesitation that she was worth protecting. She didn't know yet that Cole Bennett understood grief in a way few men did. She didn't know that 3 years earlier, he had stood over his own wife's grave in a blizzard so fierce the preacher could barely finish the service, and that he had spent every day since building walls so high around his heart that not even Margaret dared ask him about it anymore. She didn't know that the man who had ridden to her rescue was in his own way just as broken as she was. All she knew was that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had fallen asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Morning came fast and bright, and with it came work. Margaret woke Amelia before dawn, handing her an apron without ceremony. "Breakfast for 8 men doesn't cook itself," she said. "Hope you know your way around a stove." "I do," Amelia said, tying the apron with hands that hadn't held a wooden spoon in what felt like a lifetime, though it had only been 3 months since she'd left Virginia. The kitchen work came back to her quickly, flour and lard and the rhythm of biscuits rising in the heat. And by the time the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, Amelia had a spread laid out that drew appreciative murmurs from every man at the table. Jasper, the lanky young hand from the night before, took one bite of a biscuit and looked at Margaret with theatrical betrayal. "Margaret, your biscuits never tasted like this." "Watch your mouth, Jasper Coyle," Margaret said, though there was no real bite to it. Cole came in last hat in hand and paused at the sight of the table. "You did all this?" he asked Amelia. "Margaret showed me where everything was kept. The rest was easy enough." Cole studied the spread for a long moment, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between surprise and quiet approval. "Didn't expect you'd be up before the sun after the day you had." "I told you," Amelia said, meeting his eyes steadily. "I don't want charity. I intend to earn my keep." Something flickered across Cole's face. respect maybe, or the beginning of it, and for a moment the kitchen felt smaller, warmer, as though the two of them were the only people in it. Then Jasper cleared his throat loudly, and the moment broke, and Cole took his seat at the head of the table like nothing had passed between them at all. But Amelia noticed, and so from the corner of the room did Margaret. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Amelia hadn't expected to find so quickly. Mornings were biscuits and eggs and the low murmur of ranch hands trading gossip over coffee. Afternoons were mending torn shirts, tending the small garden behind the house, learning from Margaret which herbs soothed a sour stomach and which plants could poison a careless child. Evenings were quiet, the men returning from the fields, dusty and tired. Supper served at the long table, and afterward sometimes Cole would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, staring out at land that had clearly been both his salvation and his prison for longer than he cared to admit. Amelia found herself drawn to those quiet porch evenings, though she told herself it was only because the house felt too warm, and the porch felt like the only place to breathe. "You're doing well here," Cole said one evening nearly a week into her stay. "Margaret says you've got a steadier hand in that kitchen than she's had in years." High praise coming from her. She doesn't hand out praise easy, trust me. Amelia smiled small and genuine, the first real smile Cole had seen from her since that first night at the station. "I didn't expect any of this," she admitted. "I thought I was coming out here to be a wife. Instead, I've become a cook and a seamstress in a stranger's house." "You're not a stranger anymore," Cole said, then seemed to catch himself as though the words had slipped out before he'd fully considered them. Amelia looked at him carefully. "No," she agreed quietly. "I suppose I'm not." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settled between two people who were beginning cautiously to understand each other. The peace didn't last. 3 days later, Amelia rode into town with Margaret to buy supplies, and it was there, standing outside the general store, that she first heard her own name spoken in a tone that made her blood run cold. "That's her," a woman whispered to her companion, not quite quietly enough. "The one Cole Bennett brought home. Heard she came out here to marry Samuel Whitaker, then latched right onto Bennett the second she found out Whitaker was dead." "Awful quick, isn't it?" the second woman replied. "Man's barely 6 weeks in the ground, and she's already moved into another rancher's house." Amelia froze on the boardwalk, her basket of supplies suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Margaret, walking beside her, stiffened as well, her jaw tightening with barely restrained anger. "Pay them no mind," Margaret said loud enough that the two gossiping women could hear every word. Some people got nothing better to do than judge a woman for surviving hard luck. The women had the decency to look embarrassed at least, and scattered quickly into the store. But the damage had already been done. Amelia walked the rest of the way through town with her chin lifted and her eyes forward, refusing to let anyone see how deeply those words had cut. It was only when they reached the wagon that her composure finally cracked. "They think I'm some kind of opportunist," Amelia said, her voice shaking. "Like I planned any of this. Like I wanted Samuel to die so I could—" "Amelia." Margaret's voice was firm but not unkind. "People in small towns need something to talk about. Doesn't make it true. Doesn't make it right either. But what if it damages Mr. Bennett's reputation? He's already done so much for me. I won't be the reason people speak ill of him." Margaret studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful passing behind her sharp eyes. "You let Cole worry about Cole's reputation," she said finally. "That man's weathered worse storms than a little gossip. What you ought to be worrying about is whether you're going to let a couple of bored housewives convince you that you don't belong here." Amelia said nothing, but the words settled uneasily in her chest the whole ride home. It was on that same trip into town that Amelia first crossed paths with Henry Caldwell. He was standing outside the land office as their wagon rolled past a well-dressed man with cold, calculating eyes, deep in conversation with a clerk, who kept glancing nervously at a stack of documents spread across the counter. Amelia might not have noticed him at all, except that he looked up as their wagon passed, and his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Who is that?" she asked Margaret quietly. Margaret followed her gaze and her expression darkened. Henry Caldwell, land agent or so he calls himself. Been sniffing around Red Hollow the past few weeks, buying up parcels for pennies on the dollar from folks too desperate or too foolish to know better. He was looking at me. Was he now? Margaret's frown deepened. Can't imagine why a landman would take interest in a woman with no property to her name. But even as she said it, something uneasy flickered across Margaret's face, as though the question had planted a seed of worry she couldn't quite shake. Amelia glanced back once more and found Henry Caldwell still watching, his expression unreadable, before the wagon carried her out of sight. She didn't know it yet, but that single look would come to matter more than either of them could have guessed. That evening after supper, Amelia found herself once again on the porch with Cole, the events of the day sitting heavy on her shoulders. "Something's troubling you," Cole observed, watching her from his usual spot against the porch railing. Amelia hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than pretending. "People in town are talking. About me. About us." She twisted her hands together. "They think I'm the sort of woman who'd use Samuel's death to attach herself to the next man with land and money." Cole's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath his skin. "Anyone say that to your face?" "Not to my face, but I heard it plainly enough." "Give me names." "Cole, I mean it, Amelia." His voice carried a hard edge she hadn't heard from him before. "I won't have people speaking about you like you're something to be used and discarded. Not in my town. Not about someone under my roof." Amelia looked at him, startled by the sudden intensity in his eyes, by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "You barely know me," she said softly. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped low, almost as if he were admitting something to himself as much as to her. "Because I know what it is to be judged by people who don't know the first thing about what you've survived," he said. "And I'll be damned if I stand by and let it happen to you the way I let it happen to—" He stopped himself abruptly. "Let it happen to who?" Amelia asked gently. Cole shook his head, retreating behind the same wall she'd seen him build the very first night. "That's a story for another time," he said, and turned back toward the darkened fields, leaving Amelia with more questions than answers, and a strange unfamiliar ache in her chest that had nothing to do with grief for Samuel Whitaker at all. The following morning brought a visitor to the ranch that no one expected. Amelia was hanging laundry near the side of the house when a fine black carriage rolled up the dirt drive, and Henry Caldwell himself stepped down, brushing dust from his immaculate coat, with an air of a man who considered himself above the very ground he walked on. "Miss Carter, isn't it?" he said, tipping his hat with an oily smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We haven't been properly introduced. Henry Caldwell." Amelia's stomach tightened with immediate unease. "Mr. Caldwell, can I help you with something?" "Actually, I believe I might be able to help you." His smile widened, revealing teeth too white and too even. "I understand you were once engaged to the late Samuel Whitaker." Amelia went very still. "We corresponded. We were never formally engaged. A technicality, surely, given the circumstances." Caldwell stepped closer, and Amelia forced herself not to retreat. "You see, Miss Carter, Samuel Whitaker died without a will. And without a will, and without any living relations that anyone in this territory can locate his land, a rather substantial parcel, I should add, sits in a rather complicated legal limbo. I don't see what that has to do with me. Don't you?" Caldwell's eyes glittered. "A woman who can prove even the barest hint of a marital claim, a betrothal, an intent to marry correspondence establishing an understanding between two parties, that woman might find herself with quite a legitimate claim to that land. If she had the right kind of help navigating the legal particulars, of course." Amelia's pulse quickened, though not with the excitement Caldwell clearly expected. "And I suppose you'd be offering that help. For a modest consideration, yes." Caldwell's smile turned razor thin. "I've handled similar arrangements for other unfortunate widows and near widows in this territory. Quite successfully, I might add." "I'm not interested," Amelia said flatly. Caldwell's expression flickered surprise, briefly breaking through his practiced composure. "You'd turn away several hundred acres of prime grazing land without even considering the offer. I came out here for a husband, not for land, Mr. Caldwell. I have no interest in profiting from a man's death, real or invented." "How very noble," Caldwell said, though his tone made clear he found the sentiment more foolish than admirable. "Do think on it, Miss Carter. Offers such as mine don't remain available indefinitely, and I'd hate for you to find yourself with neither husband nor land nor prospects when a simple signature might have secured your future." He tipped his hat once more and returned to his carriage, leaving Amelia standing frozen by the laundry line, her heart pounding with an unease she couldn't quite name. It was only later, replaying the conversation in her mind, that the true weight of his words settled over her. Caldwell hadn't come to help her. He'd come to use her, her name, her supposed claim, her signature as a tool to seize land that wasn't rightfully his to take. And something told her this wasn't the last she'd hear from Henry Caldwell. She told Cole everything that evening, watching his expression darken with every word. "He wants you to claim a marital right to Whitaker's land," Cole said slowly, working through the implications. "Then what? Sign it over to him, sell it at whatever price he names." "That's what I understood, yes." Cole's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Caldwell's been circling this territory for months, buying up land from folks who don't know any better, or scaring off folks who do. Man's got no scruples. If he thinks he can use you to get his hands on Whitaker's spread—" "I told him no," Amelia said quickly. "I want nothing to do with it." "I believe you." Cole's eyes met hers, steady and fierce. But a man like Caldwell doesn't take no for an answer easy, not when there's money on the line. A cold weight settled in Amelia's stomach. "What do you think he'll do?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening horizon as though he could see trouble riding toward them on the evening wind. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But whatever it is, you won't be facing it alone. I already told you that once." He looked at her then, and something passed between them, something that had been building slowly over the past week and a half, something neither of them had yet found the courage to name. "I meant it," Cole said quietly. "Every word." Amelia felt her breath catch. "I know," she whispered. "I'm starting to believe you." Neither of them noticed in that quiet moment on the porch the flicker of lantern light moving along the tree line at the edge of Cole's property, a figure watching from the shadows, taking careful note of exactly how close the rancher and the woman he'd taken in had grown. Henry Caldwell hadn't given up so easily. He'd simply changed his strategy, and by the time Amelia and Cole realized how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, the danger would already be standing at their door. The figure in the trees didn't linger long. By the time Cole noticed the faint shift of lantern light through the branches, whoever had been watching was already gone, leaving nothing behind but a broken twig near the fence line, and an unease that settled into Cole's chest like a stone. "Someone was out there," he said more to himself than to Amelia. "Watching us. Watching the house." Cole's jaw tightened. "Get inside." Amelia didn't argue. She'd learned quickly that when Cole Bennett's voice dropped into that low, flat register, he wasn't asking. Inside, Margaret was already up, drawn by the sound of boots on the porch. "What's happened?" "Might be nothing," Cole said, though his rifle was already in his hands. "Somebody was watching from the tree line. Probably scared off now." "Probably," Margaret repeated, unconvinced. "You think it was one of Caldwell's men?" "Who else would have reason to be creeping around my property after dark?" Amelia felt the cold weight of guilt settle over her. "This is because of me," she said quietly. "Because of what he asked me to do. This is because Henry Caldwell is a snake who can't stand being told no," Cole said firmly. "None of this is your doing, Amelia. Don't you dare carry it like it is." But even as he said it, Amelia noticed the way his eyes kept drifting back toward the window, toward the dark beyond the glass, and she understood that whatever peace they'd found over the past week and a half had just been shattered by a man who hadn't even bothered to show his face. The rumor reached them 3 days later, carried into the kitchen by Jasper, with the particular relish of a young man who loved being the bearer of interesting news. "Whole town's talking," he said around a mouthful of biscuit, "saying Miss Carter already signed something over at the land office, saying she's set to inherit Whitaker's whole spread." Amelia dropped the spoon she'd been holding. "That's a lie. Didn't say I believed it," Jasper said quickly, holding up his hands. "Just saying what's being said." Cole's fork hit the table with a sharp clatter. "Who's saying it?" "Heard it from the fella who sweeps out the saloon. Said Caldwell himself was telling folks Miss Carter come round his office and put her mark on some paperwork establishing her claim. I've never set foot in that office." Amelia said, her voice rising with disbelief. "I told him no. I told him I wanted nothing to do with his scheme." "I believe you," Cole said, but there was something tight in his voice now, something that hadn't been there a moment before. "Question is whether the rest of Red Hollow will." Margaret set down the coffee pot with more force than necessary. "That man is building a lie brick by brick, and he's using Amelia's name to do it." "Why would he need to lie?" Amelia asked, her mind racing. "If he wants people to think I've claimed the land, what does that get him?" Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking it through with the careful patience of a man who'd learned not to underestimate an enemy. "Maybe he's trying to smoke someone out," he said finally. "If there's another party with a real claim to Whitaker's land, a relative, a partner, somebody with actual legal standing word that a stranger's already staked her claim might force them to step forward. Once they do, Caldwell knows exactly who he's dealing with. And if no one steps forward, then he's got half of the town believing you've got a legitimate claim to hundreds of acres whether you asked for it or not. Makes you a target, Amelia. For anyone who wants that land and doesn't want to wait on the courts to sort it out." The weight of that settled heavy in the room. "I need to go into town," Amelia said. "I need to tell people the truth myself." "Absolutely not," Cole said immediately. "Cole, you walk into that town alone right now with rumors like that swirling, you're liable to get cornered by folks who believe every word of it. Or worse, by Caldwell himself, looking to twist your own denial into something that serves his purpose. So what am I supposed to do? Sit here and let him build a lie around my name while I do nothing? You're supposed to let me handle it." Cole said, his voice hard as flint. "I'll ride into town myself. Talk to the sheriff. Talk to the land office clerk. Man can't build a case out of thin air without somebody eventually asking to see the paperwork." Amelia wanted to argue further, but something in Cole's expression stopped her, a fierce protective certainty that reminded her uncomfortably and thrillingly of the way he'd looked standing between her and Otis Grady on that train platform. "All right," she said finally. "But I'm not hiding, Cole. I won't cower in this house pretending I have something to be ashamed of." Cole studied her for a long moment, and something like admiration flickered behind his stormy eyes. "Didn't expect you to," he said. "Wouldn't want you to, even if I could talk you into it." The sheriff's office in Red Hollow was a small, dusty building that smelled of tobacco and old paper, and Sheriff Danby was a heavy-set man with tired eyes who'd clearly seen his fill of land disputes over the years. "Caldwell's been in here twice this week," Danby admitted, leaning back in his chair. "Showed me some paperwork. Didn't look right to me, if I'm honest." "What kind of paperwork?" Cole asked. "Letter of intent," he called it. Supposedly signed by Miss Carter, establishing her claim as Whitaker's intended bride and heir apparent to any property held in his name at time of death. Cole's hands curled into fists on the desk. "She never signed anything. Figured as much," Danby said. "Signature didn't look like the kind a genteel Virginia lady would make, if you ask me. Too rushed. Too many corrections." He shook his head. "But paperwork like that don't just disappear on my say-so. Caldwell's got it filed with the land office now. Official record. Official record built on a forgery. Prove it's a forgery, and I'll gladly toss the man in a cell for fraud." Danby's expression turned grim. "But proving it means Miss Carter's got to come in here and swear to a judge that the signature ain't hers. Means putting her name and her word right in the middle of a fight that's already got half the town choosing sides." Cole rode home with that information, sitting heavy in his chest, and it was only when he saw Amelia waiting anxiously on the porch that he realized how much he dreaded telling her. "He forged your signature," Cole said without preamble, unable to soften it. "Filed paperwork with the land office claiming you agreed to be his intended bride heir to Whitaker's estate." Amelia went pale. "He can do that. Just fabricate my consent, my signature, and have it treated as truth. Not for long if I have anything to say about it. But it means we've got a fight on our hands now. A real one." Amelia sank onto the porch steps, her hands trembling in her lap. "I never wanted any part of this," she whispered. "I never wanted his land, his money, none of it. All I wanted was—" She stopped herself. "All you wanted was what?" Cole asked gently, sitting down beside her. Amelia looked at him, and for a moment, something raw and unguarded passed across her face. "All I wanted was a home," she admitted. "A place where I belonged. That's the only reason I got on that train in the first place." Cole was quiet for a long moment, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "You've got that here," he said finally, his voice low. "Whatever Caldwell's trying to build with his lies, that's not going to change what's real. And what's real is that you belong at this table, in this kitchen, on this porch, whether some land-hungry snake likes it or not." Amelia's breath caught. "Cole, I mean it, Amelia." He turned to face her fully now, something fierce and certain burning behind his eyes. "I don't care what lies he's spreading in town. I don't care what forged papers he's filed with the land office. You are not some pawn in his scheme. You're a woman who survived a betrayal I can't even fully understand, who walked into a stranger's home with nothing but a suitcase and made herself indispensable inside of 2 weeks. That's who you are, not whatever name Caldwell's trying to hang on you." Tears slipped down Amelia's cheeks, but for the first time in days, they weren't tears of grief. "Thank you," she whispered. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The space between them charged with something neither had yet found the courage to name, and Amelia found herself wondering with a flutter of nervous hope whether Cole might close that distance entirely. But then Jasper's voice rang out from the barn, calling Cole's name about some trouble with a fence line, and the moment shattered as quickly as it had formed. Cole stood, cleared his throat, and put his hat back on. "I'll take care of the fence," he said. "You should rest. Tomorrow we ride into town together. Face this thing head on." Amelia watched him walk away, her heart pounding in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear of Henry Caldwell at all. That night, unable to sleep, Amelia found Margaret still awake in the kitchen, mending a torn shirt by lamplight. "Couldn't sleep either?" Margaret asked without looking up. "Too much on my mind." Amelia sat across from her. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Ask away." "Cole mentioned the first night I arrived that he'd lost someone. He wouldn't say more than that. Do you know what happened?" Margaret's needle paused mid-stitch. "That's his story to tell, not mine." "I understand. Amelia hesitated. "I want to understand him. He's done so much for me, and I feel like I barely know the man underneath all that kindness." Margaret set down her sewing and studied Amelia for a long moment, as though weighing how much was hers to share. "His wife's name was Sarah," she said finally. "Sweetest woman you ever met. They married young, built this whole ranch up from nothing together. 3 years back she took sick during a blizzard bad enough that no doctor could reach the property in time. Cole tried everything. Rode out into that storm himself looking for help, nearly died doing it. By the time he made it back with the doctor from the next county over, it was already too late." Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. "He watched her die." "He blames himself for it," Margaret said quietly. "Thinks if he'd ridden faster, chosen a different route, done something different, she might still be here. Man's carried that weight 3 years now, building walls so high, I wasn't sure anybody would ever get past them again." "But he let me in," Amelia said almost to herself. "That first night. He didn't hesitate." Margaret's expression softened. "No," she agreed. "He didn't. And in 3 years, I ain't never seen him do that for anybody else." The weight of that settled over Amelia like a warm blanket, and she sat with it long after Margaret had gone to bed, staring into the dying embers of the fire, understanding for the first time just how much courage it must have taken for a man so wounded to offer protection to a stranger. The ride into town the next morning was tense. Cole's hand never straying far from the rifle strapped to his saddle, Amelia sitting straight-backed and resolute, despite the anxious flutter in her stomach. They found Henry Caldwell exactly where Cole expected, holding court outside the land office, surrounded by a small cluster of townsfolk hanging on his every word. "Ah, Miss Carter." Caldwell said, his smile sharpening the moment he spotted her. "How fortunate. I was just explaining to these good people the particulars of your claim to the Whitaker estate." "There is no claim," Amelia said, her voice carrying clearly across the street. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything. Whatever document you've filed is a forgery, Mr. Caldwell, and you know it." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Caldwell's smile didn't waver, though something cold flickered behind his eyes. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Carter. Are you certain you wish to make it publicly?" "I'm certain I wish to stop you from stealing land using my name without my consent." "Careful," Caldwell said softly, stepping closer. "Accusations of that nature could be seen as slanderous, and slander, Miss Carter, is a costly thing to defend against for a woman with no money and no standing in this territory." "She's not facing it alone," Cole said, stepping up beside Amelia, his presence a wall of quiet menace. "And you'd best remember that before you go threatening her with lawyers, you're hoping she can't afford." Caldwell's gaze flicked to Cole, calculating. "Bennett, should have known you'd insert yourself into matters that don't concern you." "Whatever concerns Miss Carter concerns me," Cole said flatly. "And forging a woman's signature to steal a dead man's land concerns the sheriff, which is exactly who I'm about to fetch if you don't withdraw that paperwork before sundown." For the first time, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed Caldwell's face. "You're bluffing." "Try me." The two men stared each other down for a long, tense moment, the small crowd holding its collective breath, until finally Caldwell forced a thin smile and stepped back. "No need for threats, Bennett. I'm a reasonable man. If Miss Carter insists the signature isn't hers, I'm certain the matter can be reviewed." "See that it is," Cole said. "Today." Caldwell tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy and retreated into the land office, but not before shooting Amelia one final look, cold, calculating, and unmistakably a warning that this was far from over. The paperwork was quietly withdrawn by that evening, but the damage to Amelia's reputation in town proved harder to undo. Whispers followed her through the general store the next time she went in for supplies. Women who had once nodded politely now turned away, murmuring behind gloved hands. Even the shopkeeper's wife, normally cheerful, counted out Amelia's change without meeting her eyes. "I don't understand," Amelia said miserably that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. "I told the truth." Caldwell withdrew his forged claim. "Why does it still feel like the whole town believes I did something wrong?" "Because gossip don't care about truth," Margaret said, setting a cup of tea in front of her. "Gossip cares about a good story. And a story about a mysterious woman scheming to steal a dead man's land is a lot more interesting than the boring truth of a con man forging documents." "It's not fair." "No," Margaret agreed. "It ain't. But you know what is fair? The people who actually matter, the people in this house, we know the truth. And that's worth a whole lot more than the opinion of women who'd rather gossip over a shop counter than mind their own affairs." Amelia managed a small, tired smile. "You always know just what to say, Margaret." "Comes with age," Margaret said, patting her hand. "Now finish your tea. Cole's been out in that barn brooding for 2 hours, and I suspect he could use some company more than he'd ever admit." Amelia found Cole exactly where Margaret said he'd be, mending a section of fence rail by lantern light. Despite the late hour, his movements sharp and forceful in a way that suggested he was working out frustration rather than genuine repair needs. "You're going to hurt yourself hammering like that," Amelia said from the doorway. Cole didn't look up. "Fence needed fixing." "That fence has needed fixing for exactly the 15 minutes you've been out here taking your anger out on it." That got a small, reluctant huff of something almost like a laugh. Caldwell makes my blood boil, Cole admitted, finally setting down the hammer. Man walks around this territory like he owns it, forging documents, spreading lies, threatening folks who can't afford to fight back. Makes me want to... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Want to what? Amelia asked gently. Doesn't matter. Wouldn't solve anything acting on it. You held yourself together today, Amelia said, stepping closer. In front of the whole town. You didn't let him goad you into anything reckless. Barely, Cole admitted. Man looks at you the way he did today like you're something to be used and discarded. Took everything in me not to put him through that land office window. Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. You didn't, though. You handled it. Had to. Cole finally looked at her, his stormy eyes softening in the lantern light. Couldn't let anything happen that might make things worse for you. Not after everything you've already survived. You keep saying things like that, Amelia said softly. Like my well-being is your responsibility. Maybe it is, Cole said, his voice dropping lower. Maybe I decided that the moment I found you alone on that platform. The space between them had narrowed without either of them quite noticing, the lantern light casting a warm glow that made the barn feel smaller, more intimate than it had any right to. Cole, Amelia whispered. Amelia. His hand rose, hesitant, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. I know it's too soon, Cole said quietly. I know you came out here for another man, and I know grief doesn't work on any kind of schedule, but I need you to know that whatever's happening between us, I'm not imagining it. You're not, Amelia confirmed, her heart hammering. I feel it too. For a moment, it seemed as though the distance between them might close entirely. Then a horse's frantic whinny split the night air, followed by the unmistakable crackle of fire. Cole's head snapped toward the sound. That's coming from the north pasture. By the time they reached the north fence line, flames were already licking hungrily at a section of dry grass near the property boundary, the fire spreading fast in the summer dry conditions. Get the others, Cole shouted, already grabbing a blanket to beat at the flames. Jasper, everyone up. The next 20 minutes passed in a chaotic blur of shouting men, beating blankets and buckets of water, hauled desperately from the nearest trough. The entire household working together against a fire that threatened to consume acres of grazing land if left unchecked. Amelia worked alongside the ranch hands, her arms burning with exertion, her dress streaked with soot and ash, until finally the flames began to die under their combined effort. It's out! Jasper gasped, collapsing against a fence post. Thank God it's out! Cole surveyed the scorched earth, his expression grim. This wasn't an accident. What do you mean? Amelia asked, though a cold dread was already forming in her stomach. Fire started right along the property line. No lightning tonight. No reason for a spark out here on its own. Cole crouched down, examining the charred ground. Somebody set this deliberately. Caldwell. Amelia breathed. Can't prove it, Cole said, standing slowly. But I don't believe in coincidence, not after everything else that's happened this week. Margaret arrived breathless, having run from the house. Everyone accounted for nobody hurt. Everyone's fine, Cole confirmed. Lost some grazing land, but nothing that can't recover come next season. Small mercies, Margaret said, though her eyes were sharp with the same suspicion that had settled over everyone present. Amelia stood amid the smoldering aftermath, ash settling in her hair, and felt something harden inside her that hadn't been there before. Not fear exactly, but a fierce determination that refused to be intimidated by a man who would burn land and forge documents rather than accept a simple no. He's trying to scare us, she said quietly. Trying to make it clear what he's capable of. Won't work, Cole said, his voice hard as steel. Not on me, and I won't let it work on you either. Bowden Siri. The days that followed brought an uneasy quiet, the kind that settled over a household bracing for the next blow rather than trusting that the danger had truly passed. Cole doubled the night watches. Margaret kept a shotgun within reach in the kitchen. Even Jasper, usually so quick with a joke, grew watchful and serious, patrolling the property boundaries with an intensity Amelia hadn't seen from him before. Through it all, something between Cole and Amelia continued to deepen, forged in the shared adversity of facing Caldwell's escalating threats together. "You don't have to stay, you know," Cole told her one evening, nearly 2 weeks after the fire, as they walked the mended fence line together. "If this is too much, the danger, the gossip in town, all of it, nobody would blame you for wanting to leave. There's still a train that runs through Red Hollow." Amelia stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No," Cole said immediately, then seemed almost startled by the force of his own answer. "God, no. That's the last thing I want. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I don't want you staying out of obligation, or fear of what waits for you back east. I want you staying because it's what you actually want." Amelia stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could see every flicker of vulnerability in his stormy eyes. "I stayed because for the first time in 5 years I feel like I belong somewhere," she said softly. "I stayed because Margaret treats me like family instead of charity. I stayed because you looked at a woman abandoned at a train station and decided without a moment's hesitation that she was worth protecting." She reached up her hand, resting gently against his chest. "And if I'm honest, Cole Bennett, I stayed because somewhere along the way, protecting me stopped being an obligation and started feeling like something else entirely." Cole's breath caught. "Amelia, I know Sarah meant everything to you." Amelia continued, her voice gentle but sure. "Margaret told me, and I would never ask you to forget her or to pretend those 3 years of grief don't matter. But I don't think loving someone new erases loving someone who came before. I think maybe a heart can hold both." Cole stared at her, something raw and unguarded breaking across his face. 3 years of carefully constructed walls trembling under the weight of her words. "I haven't let myself feel anything like this since I lost her," he admitted, his voice rough. "Told myself I wasn't allowed to. Told myself the ranch, the work, that was supposed to be enough." "And is it?" Amelia asked softly. "Enough?" "It was," Cole said, his hand coming up to cover hers where it rested against his chest. "Until a woman showed up at Red Hollow Station with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, and reminded me what it felt like to actually want something again. The kiss, when it finally came, was slow and searching. 3 years of grief and 2 weeks of careful hope finally finding release in a single tender moment that neither of them had quite dared to imagine just days before. When they finally broke apart, Amelia pressed her forehead against his, both of them breathing unsteadily. "That complicates things," Cole said, a faint, wondering smile tugging at his mouth. "Does it?" Amelia asked. "Caldwell's already spreading lies about you scheming for land and money. Man finds out you and I have feelings for each other, he's liable to twist that into something even uglier." "Let him try," Amelia said, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "I've survived betrayal, abandonment, forged documents, and a fire meant to frighten me off. I'm not about to let Henry Caldwell dictate who I'm allowed to care for." Cole studied her with open admiration. "You really aren't afraid of him, are you?" "I'm afraid," Amelia admitted. "But I've decided fear doesn't get to make my choices for me anymore. Not after everything I've already lost by letting other people control my life." Their newfound happiness, however fragile, lasted exactly 4 days before the next blow fell. It came in the form of a visitor. Amelia never expected a thin, nervous man who introduced himself at the ranch house door as Thomas Reed, the clerk from the land office, who had assisted Caldwell with the forged paperwork weeks earlier. "I need to speak with Miss Carter," he said, glancing anxiously over his shoulder as though expecting to be followed. "Alone if possible. It's a matter of some urgency." Cole positioned himself firmly beside Amelia. "Whatever you've got to say, you can say in front of me." Reed hesitated, then seemed to deflate, exhaustion and guilt visible in every line of his posture. "Caldwell's going to ruin me," he said quietly. "He's got debts. I owe him debts I never should have taken on, and he's been using them to force my hand on more than just your paperwork, Miss Carter." "What do you mean?" Amelia asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "The forged signature wasn't the only document I helped him falsify." Reed's hands trembled as he reached into his coat and produced a small bundle of papers. "There's a whole scheme, Miss Carter. Caldwell's been forging land claims across half this territory, using desperate folks' names and situations to build fraudulent title after fraudulent title. Your name was just the latest one he tried." Cole took the papers, scanning them with growing fury. "This is enough to hang the man for fraud. It's enough to ruin me too," Reed said miserably. "I falsified those records under duress, but a judge ain't likely to care much about duress when there's a paper trail with my handwriting all over it." "Why bring this to us?" Amelia asked. "Why risk everything to expose him now?" Reed's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with a desperate kind of shame. "Because I've got a conscience, even if I've been too much of a coward to listen to it until now," he said. "And because Caldwell's planning something bigger, Miss Carter, something involving Bennett's ranch itself." Cole went very still. "What kind of something?" Reed swallowed hard. "He's found an old boundary dispute decades old involving the original land grant for this property. Says there's a discrepancy in the survey that could call the whole title into question. He's planning to use it same as he tried to use Miss Carter's supposed claim on Whitaker's land building a legal case to seize property that ain't rightfully his." "That's absurd," Cole said. "This land's been in continuous ownership since before I was born. Absurd or not, if he files the right paperwork with the right judge. One he's already got in his pocket. Mind you, he could tie this property up in legal limbo for years. Long enough to force a forced sale if the legal fees alone don't bankrupt you first." The color drained from Amelia's face. "He's not just after Whitaker's land," she whispered. "He's after this ranch too, Cole's entire home." "Seems that way," Reed confirmed grimly. "And with the fire he set on your north pasture and the lies he's spreading in town, I'd wager he's building towards something bigger than either of you realize." Cole's expression had gone hard and cold, a barely contained fury simmering just beneath the surface. "When's he planning to file this claim?" "Within the week from what I overheard. He's just waiting on one final piece, some documentation from the original survey that he's had someone digging up out of the county archives." "Then we don't have much time," Cole said grimly. Reed shifted nervously. "There's one more thing," he added, his voice dropping even lower. "Caldwell's not working alone in this. He's got a partner, someone with real money behind this whole operation, someone using Caldwell as the face of it while they stay hidden. I don't know the name, but whoever it is, they're the one truly calling the shots." The revelation hung in the air like a held breath, transforming what Amelia and Cole had believed to be one greedy land agent's scheme into something far larger, far more dangerous, and far more deeply rooted than either of them had imagined. "We need the sheriff," Amelia said. "Now, before Caldwell files anything else." "Sheriff Danby's a good man, but he's cautious," Cole said. "He'll need solid proof before he moves against someone with Caldwell's resources. This." He gestured to Reed's bundle of forged documents. "This might be exactly what we need." Reed's hands were shaking as he handed over the papers fully. "I'll testify if it comes to that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "God help me, I'll testify to everything, even if it means my own ruin. I can't keep living with what I've done." Cole studied the frightened clerk for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his hardened expression. "Takes courage to admit wrongdoing, Reed. More courage than most men manage." "Doesn't feel like courage," Reed admitted. "Feels like the last honest thing I've got left to offer." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, looking back at Amelia with an expression of genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, for whatever part I played in dragging you into this mess. You didn't deserve any of it." "Thank you for telling us the truth," Amelia said. "Better late than never." Reed nodded once, then disappeared into the gathering dusk, leaving behind a household braced for a fight that had suddenly grown far larger than any of them had anticipated. That night, Cole sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, poring over the forged documents by lamplight, his expression a mixture of fury and grim determination. Amelia found him there near midnight, unable to sleep herself. "You should rest," she said gently, settling into the chair across from him. "Can't. Not with all this hanging over us." Cole rubbed his tired eyes. "This land's been in my family for 2 generations, Amelia. My father built this ranch from nothing. I built on what he started. The idea that some paper-pushing con man could just walk in and take it using forged surveys and dirty judges—" "He won't," Amelia said firmly. "We have proof now. Reed's testimony, these forged documents. We have everything we need to expose him. If Reed doesn't lose his nerve, if Danby moves fast enough, if Caldwell's mystery partner doesn't have deeper pockets than we can fight against." Cole shook his head. Too many ifs. Amelia reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You told me once that I didn't have to face this alone," she said softly. "I'm telling you the same thing now. Whatever comes, Cole, you don't have to carry it by yourself." Cole looked up at her, something fierce and grateful passing across his exhausted features. "When did you become the one comforting me?" he asked, a faint, weary smile tugging at his mouth. "Seems like it should be the other way around, given everything I dragged you into." "You didn't drag me into anything," Amelia said. "You saved me from a train platform and a lonely future. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That's not a debt I'm repaying, Cole. That's just what it means to love someone." The word hung between them, unplanned and unguarded, and Amelia watched Cole's breath catch as the full weight of it settled over him. "Say that again," he said quietly. "I love you," Amelia said steadier this time, sure of it in a way she hadn't expected to feel so soon after so much loss. "I know it's fast. I know we've only had a few weeks. But I've never felt as certain of anything as I feel about this." Cole rose from his chair, crossed to her side of the table, and pulled her gently to her feet, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that stole the breath from her lungs. "I love you too." He said the words rough with 3 years of buried grief, finally giving way to something new and vital. "God help me, Amelia. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you sitting on that station bench trying so hard to be brave when your whole world had just fallen apart." Their second kiss was different from the first, less searching, more certain, a promise passing between them that neither Henry Caldwell nor his hidden partner, nor all the forged documents in the territory could break. But even as they held each other in the quiet kitchen, a distant sound broke the stillness of the night, the unmistakable rhythm of a horse approaching fast along the drive, far too late for any friendly visitor. Cole pulled back sharply, his hand already reaching for the rifle propped near the door. "Stay behind me," he said, all tenderness gone from his voice, replaced by the hard readiness of a man expecting trouble. Amelia's heart pounded as the hoofbeats grew louder, closer, and somewhere in the dark, beyond the porch, a voice called out Cole's name with an urgency that promised nothing good. "Cole, Cole, you in there?" The voice belonged to Jasper, and it carried the particular panic of a young man who had run his horse hard enough to nearly ruin it. Cole was already at the door before the second shout, finished rifle in hand, Amelia 1 step behind him, despite his earlier order to stay back. "What's happened?" Cole demanded, throwing the door open. Jasper half fell off his horse, chest heaving. "Men out by the north boundary. 3 of 'em, maybe 4. Got lanterns, shovels, something that looked like survey stakes. I hollered at 'em and they scattered, but not before I got a good look." Cole's jaw tightened to stone. "Caldwell's boundary claim," he said. "He's planting evidence to back it up." "That's what I figured," Jasper said. "Didn't want to tangle with 4 armed men alone, so I rode straight back." "Smart!" Cole was already moving toward the barn, shouting orders to the other 2 hands who'd stumbled out, half-dressed at the commotion. "Saddle up, all of you. We ride now before they finish whatever they're building out there." "I'm coming too," Amelia said. Cole turned on her sharply. "No." "Cole." "Amelia, listen to me." He gripped her shoulders, his voice urgent, but not unkind. "There are armed men out there planting false evidence on my land. If this goes wrong, I need to know you're safe here, not caught in the middle of it. And if something happens to you, Then Margaret's got the shotgun, and you two bar that door until we're back." His eyes searched hers, softening despite the urgency. "Please, I can't fight clear-headed if I'm worried about you being out there too." Amelia's protest died in her throat. She recognized the fear underneath his command. Not fear of Caldwell's men, but fear of losing someone else he loved to a night gone wrong. "Go," she said finally. "Be careful." Cole kissed her once hard and quick, then swung up onto his horse and rode into the dark with 3 men at his back, leaving Amelia standing on the porch with her heart in her throat. They found the men exactly where Jasper had described, crouched near the old boundary marker, with lanterns shielded, and a fresh-cut survey stake half buried in the ground beside the original decades-old post. "Evening." Cole called out, rifle already leveled. "Mind telling me what you're doing on my property in the dead of night?" 2 of the men bolted, immediately disappearing into the brush before anyone could stop them. The third, a wiry man with a nervous face, froze with a shovel still in his hands. "Nothing," he stammered. Just surveying is all." In the middle of the night, with a fresh stake set 2 feet off the original marker. Cole dismounted, slowly closing the distance with deliberate menace. "You've got about 5 seconds to start telling me the truth before I let Sheriff Danby ask the questions instead, and he won't be nearly as patient as I am." The man's eyes darted toward the tree line, calculating his odds of running and finding them poor, with 3 armed ranch hands surrounding him. "Silas," he said finally, his voice cracking. "Silas Grubb. Caldwell's paying me. Paying all of us. Told us to move the boundary markers, make it look like the original survey was wrong, like your land's been sitting 200 yards over the true line for 30 years. "Convenient," Cole said coldly. "And I suppose once your fake evidence gets filed with the land office, Caldwell's got grounds to reopen the whole title. That's the idea, yeah?" Silas swallowed hard. "Mister, I don't want no trouble. Caldwell offered good money and times are hard, but I ain't looking to hang for fraud over some rich man's scheme." "Then you'll talk to the sheriff. Tell him everything. Every stake you moved, every dollar Caldwell paid you, every word he said about his plans." Silas nodded frantically. "I'll talk, I swear it. Just—" He hesitated, glancing around as though the darkness itself might be listening. "There's something you ought to know first. Caldwell ain't doing this alone. Never was." Cole went very still. "Say that again." "He's got a partner. Somebody putting up real money behind all this. The forged documents, the survey scheme, even the fire out at your north pasture a few weeks back. Caldwell's just the face of it. The one taking the risk while somebody else stays clean and collects the profit." "Who?" Silas's eyes darted nervously. "I don't know a name. Caldwell's careful about that. But I heard him on the telephone line into Cheyenne once talking real familiar, calling the fella an old friend with an old grudge. Said something about how this land should have belonged to him years back, before Bennett's daddy ever staked his claim." Cole's blood ran cold. An old grudge. Land that should have belonged to someone else years back. "That's not enough to go on," Cole said, though something uneasy had already begun turning over in his gut. "It's all I got," Silas said miserably. "I swear it, mister. I'm just hired muscle. Whoever's really behind this Caldwell keeps that name locked up tight." Cole studied the frightened man for a long moment, then turned to Jasper. "Tie his hands. We're bringing him to Danby tonight, whether he likes being woken or not." Sheriff Danby roused from bed and thoroughly displeased about it. Listened to Silas's confession with a deepening frown, taking notes by lamplight, as the wiry man laid out everything he knew about Caldwell's boundary scheme. "This is enough to arrest Caldwell for attempted fraud," Danby said finally, setting down his pen. "Combined with what Reed already gave you about the forged marriage claim, we're building a real case here, Bennett." "Not real enough if there's a silent partner still out there pulling strings," Cole said. "Man walks free. He just hires somebody else to finish what Caldwell started." "Agreed. But without a name, I might know someone who can help with that," Cole said slowly. An idea forming that he didn't entirely like. "Otis Grady's been sniffing around town for weeks. Man's got a grudge against half this territory and money nobody can quite account for. If anybody knows who's really bankrolling Caldwell, my money's on him, having heard something." Danby's eyebrows rose. "Grady's the one who accosted Miss Carter at the station, if I recall the report right." "That's him. Man like that isn't likely to volunteer information out of the goodness of his heart." "No," Cole agreed grimly. "But he might if he thinks it'll save his own skin once word gets out that Caldwell's operation is unraveling." Cole didn't get the chance to test that theory the next morning because trouble arrived at the ranch before he could ride into town looking for Grady. Amelia was in the garden when the wagon rolled up, and something about the too casual way it approached, slow, deliberate, no urgency to it at all, made the hair on her arms stand up before she even saw who was driving. Henry Caldwell climbed down, his usual polished smile stretched thin over something harder underneath. "Miss Carter, I wonder if I might have a word." "You're not welcome here, Mr. Caldwell. I won't take much of your time." He glanced toward the house, toward the barn, clearly assessing whether Cole was within earshot. "I understand my associate was apprehended last night. Rather unfortunate turn of events." Amelia's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about that." "Of course you wouldn't." Caldwell's smile sharpened. "But I suspect Mr. Bennett does, and I suspect he's building quite a case against me with the sheriff's help, which brings me to my proposal." "I have no interest in any proposal you might offer. Hear me out before you decide that." Caldwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm prepared to walk away from the Whitaker land claim entirely. Drop the boundary dispute against Bennett's property as well. All I require in exchange is a simple statement from you, a sworn statement that Silas Grubb's confession was coerced, that Bennett threatened him into lying about my involvement." Amelia stared at him, disbelief giving way to fury. "You want me to lie, to protect you. I want you to consider your options carefully." Caldwell said, his voice hardening. "Because if this goes to trial, Miss Carter, I promise you it won't only be my reputation dragged through the mud. A clever lawyer could paint quite an unflattering picture of a woman who arrived, promised to one man, took up residence with another inside 2 weeks, and now stands to benefit handsomely should that second man's enemies be discredited in open court." "You're threatening me." "I'm informing you," Caldwell said coolly, "of exactly how ugly this could become for everyone involved, yourself included. If you don't help me put an end to it quietly." Amelia's hands curled into fists at her sides, but before she could respond, Cole's voice cut across the yard like a whip crack. "Get off my land, Caldwell." Caldwell turned unhurriedly to find Cole striding toward them, rifle in hand, fury written plainly across every line of his face. "Bennett, I was just having a friendly conversation with Miss Carter." "Looked like a threat to me." Cole positioned himself between Caldwell and Amelia without breaking stride. "And I've got a witness now who'll swear to exactly that should it come to it." Caldwell's composure flickered just slightly. "You're making a mistake escalating this. I have resources you can't begin to imagine, Bennett. This land dispute, this whole affair, it could end quietly, or it could end with everything you've built torn apart in court piece by piece until there's nothing left to salvage." "Then I guess we'll see which one happens," Cole said. "Because I'm not lying down for you, and neither is she." Caldwell studied them both for a long, cold moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes. "Very well," he said finally. "I gave you the chance to end this reasonably. What happens next is on your heads, not mine." He climbed back into his wagon and drove off without another word, leaving a silence behind him that felt heavier than any threat he could have spoken aloud. "He's getting desperate," Cole said that evening, pacing the length of the kitchen while Margaret and Amelia watched from the table. "Desperate men make mistakes, but they also do reckless things. I don't like it." "He tried to bribe me into lying," Amelia said. "Threatened to drag my name through scandal if I refused. And you told him no." Cole's voice carried unmistakable pride beneath the worry. "Of course I told him no." Amelia's chin lifted. "I've already survived one man's lies destroying my future, Cole. I won't build my safety on telling another one." Margaret refilled the teapot, her expression thoughtful. Question is what he does now that his bribe's been refused. That's what worries me, Cole admitted. Man like Caldwell doesn't just walk away when he's cornered. He finds another angle. As if summoned by the very conversation, hoofbeats sounded on the drive once more, and this time it was Thomas Reed who appeared at the door, disheveled and clearly terrified, glancing over his shoulder with the wild-eyed look of a man who believed himself followed. "They're on to me," Reed gasped, nearly collapsing against the doorframe. "Caldwell knows I talked. I need to disappear, but before I go, there's something you have to know. Come inside," Cole said urgently, pulling him in and bolting the door behind him. "Sit. Breathe. Tell us what happened." Reed dropped into a chair, hands shaking too badly to hold the cup of water Margaret pressed into them. "I went back to the county archive today," he said. "Wanted to find the original survey documents, the real ones, to prove the boundary marker Caldwell's men planted was fraudulent. Found more than I bargained for." "What did you find?" Amelia asked. Reed reached into his coat with trembling hands and produced a single folded document, its edges worn with age. "A land grant," he said. "Original claim filed on this exact parcel 31 years back, before your father ever staked his claim, Bennett." Cole took the document, scanning it with growing confusion. "This can't be right. My father's claim was legal, filed proper with the territorial office." "It was," Reed confirmed. "But this claim came first, filed 6 months before your father's, then abandoned when the original claimant couldn't meet the residency requirement. Territory law at the time said an abandoned claim opened the land back up for new filing, which is exactly what your father did. Perfectly legal." "Then what's the problem?" Reed's eyes were haunted. "The problem is the name on that original claim, Bennett. The man who filed first, then lost it on a technicality he probably never even knew he'd triggered." He pointed to the faded signature at the bottom of the document. Cole read it once, then again, his face draining of color. "Otis Grady. That's him," Cole said slowly. "That's Caldwell's silent partner. Grady's not just some drifter with a grudge. He's the man who thinks this land was stolen from him 30 years ago. Grady wasn't drifting through Red Hollow by accident," Reed confirmed. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Bankrolling Caldwell's scheme, using him as the legal front while staying hidden himself. If this old claim ever got successfully reopened, argued as improperly forfeited due to some clerical oversight in the residency requirement, he could take the whole ranch." Cole finished, his voice hollow. "Legally, through the courts with a corrupt judge already in his pocket." Amelia's mind raced back to that first night at the train station, to Otis Grady's cold eyes and colder proposition, and a sick understanding began to settle over her. "He recognized me," she whispered. "That first night, when you stopped him from whatever he intended. He didn't just walk away because you scared him off, did he?" "What do you mean?" Cole asked. "I think he already knew who you were," Amelia said, slowly piecing it together as she spoke. "I think when he saw you ride up to defend a stranger at that station, he realized exactly who I'd ended up with. And when he found out afterward that I was staying at your ranch, he saw an opportunity," Reed finished grimly. "A woman connected to both properties. He wanted Whitaker's land and Bennett's ranch. Use Caldwell to build a claim through you, on one, build a claim through the old grant on the other. Two birds, Miss Carter. You were never his target. You were his method." The weight of that revelation settled over the kitchen like a physical thing, and Amelia felt sick with the understanding that she had been a pawn in Grady's scheme from the very first moment he'd approached her on that station platform. "We need this document filed with the sheriff immediately," Cole said, already moving toward the door. "Combined with Silas's confession and whatever else we can gather, there's no time." Reed interrupted, panic rising in his voice again. "Caldwell knows I'm exposed. If he realizes I found this grant, if he realizes I've brought it to you—" The sound of breaking glass cut him off. A rock sailed through the kitchen window, wrapped in paper, skittering across the floor to stop at Amelia's feet. Cole snatched it up, unfolding the note with hands that had gone cold with fury. His face went white as he read it. "What does it say?" Amelia asked, though something in his expression already told her it was nothing good. Cole's jaw clenched so tight the muscle stood out along his cheek. "It says Caldwell's got Reed's family," he said quietly. "His wife, his daughter staying with her sister in town for the summer. Says if Reed doesn't retract his confession by morning, if this document doesn't disappear, they won't be staying safe much longer." Reed made a sound like a wounded animal, all color draining from his face. "No," he whispered. "No, God, no. They're supposed to be safe. He doesn't know where." "He knows," Cole said grimly. "Caldwell's been watching this whole territory like a hawk. Nothing's safe from a man desperate enough to burn a pasture and forge a dead man's marriage claim." Amelia's stomach twisted with a fear that went beyond herself now, beyond even Cole's ranch, extending to an innocent woman and child whose only crime was being connected to a man brave enough to tell the truth. "We have to get to them," she said. "Now before Caldwell does something we can't undo." Cole was already grabbing his hat and rifle. "Jasper, saddle the horses. We ride into town now." "I'm coming," Amelia said, and this time Cole didn't argue. There wasn't time to argue. The ride into Red Hollow felt like the longest of Amelia's life. Every hoofbeat pounding out a rhythm of dread, every shadow along the road looking like it might hide Caldwell's men waiting to strike. They found the boarding house where Reed's wife and daughter were staying, dark and quiet, no signs of struggle, no broken windows or overturned furniture. But when Reed pounded desperately on the door, no one answered. "Mrs. Pratchett," Cole called, recognizing the boarding house as the same one the station master had mentioned to Amelia weeks earlier. "It's Cole Bennett, open up." The door finally opened a crack, revealing Mrs. Pratchett's frightened face. "Mr. Bennett, thank the Lord. There were men here not an hour past, rough-looking sorts. Said they had business with Mrs. Reed." "Where are they?" Reed demanded, pushing past her. "Where's my wife, my daughter?" "Took them, Mr. Reed. Said something about ensuring your cooperation. I wanted to fetch the sheriff, but they warned me plain enough what would happen if I did." Reed's legs buckled, and only Cole's quick hand kept him from collapsing entirely. "This is my fault," Reed said brokenly. "I brought this on them I should never have." "This is Caldwell's fault," Cole said firmly. "And Grady's. Nobody else's. Now pull yourself together, because falling apart won't get your family back." Amelia stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling tight in her chest. "Where would he take them? Caldwell must have somewhere close, somewhere he feels safe holding people without drawing attention." "His office," Reed said slowly, thinking through it. "No too public, too many folks passing by. But he's got a warehouse out past the rail yard, uses it to store surveying equipment supplies. It's isolated enough." "Then that's where we start," Cole said. "Damn." They found the warehouse exactly where Reed had described, a weathered building, set back from the rail line, a single lantern glowing faint through a cracked window. Cole held up a hand, signaling the others to stay back, as he crept closer, peering through the gap in the boards. What he saw made his blood run cold. Reed's wife sat bound to a chair, her young daughter clutched against her chest, both of them silent with terror. Two of Caldwell's hired men stood guard near the door, while Caldwell himself paced impatiently near a desk cluttered with papers. And standing in the shadows near the back wall, arms crossed watching the scene with cold satisfaction, was Otis Grady. "He's here," Cole whispered, pulling back from the window. "Grady himself, and two armed men guarding Reed's family." "We can't just walk in there," Jasper said. "Not with a woman and child in the crossfire if things go wrong." "No," Cole agreed. "We need Danby, now." "There's no time to ride for the sheriff and back," Amelia said urgently. "Caldwell could hurt them the moment he realizes we've found this place." "Then we need a distraction," Cole said, his mind racing. "Something to draw the guards outside, give us a chance to get to the family without a fight breaking out around them." Amelia's chin lifted with sudden fierce determination. "Let me talk to him." "Absolutely not," Cole said immediately. "Cole, think about it. Caldwell's already tried to bribe me once. He'll want to hear if I've reconsidered his offer. It gives me a reason to walk through that door that won't immediately put him on guard. And if it goes wrong, if he decides you're more useful as another hostage than a bargaining partner, then you'll already be in position to stop him. Amelia said, I trust you, Cole. I trust you to protect me the way you promised that first night. But I won't stand by while an innocent woman and her child stay in danger because I was too afraid to act. Cole stared at her torn between fear and undeniable admiration before finally nodding once, sharp and reluctant. You go in talking. The second anything feels wrong, you get down, you get clear, and you let us handle the rest. Understood. Understood. Amelia's knock on the warehouse door echoed louder than she expected, and for a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened at all. Then the door creaked open, revealing one of Caldwell's armed men, his expression shifting from suspicion to surprise as he recognized her. Miss Carter. I need to speak with Mr. Caldwell, Amelia said, keeping her voice steady despite her hammering heart. I've reconsidered his offer. The guard hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her inside. Caldwell looked up from his papers, genuine surprise crossing his face before his usual oily smile slid back into place. Miss Carter, this is an unexpected pleasure. Amelia's eyes flicked briefly to Reed's wife and daughter, bound and frightened in the corner, before she forced her attention back to Caldwell. You made me an offer, she said. I'd like to discuss the terms. How fortunate, Caldwell said, though something suspicious flickered behind his eyes. And how convenient that you arrived at precisely this moment. I heard you had leverage to ensure Mr. Reed's cooperation, Amelia said carefully. I assumed that meant you'd finally understood the value of applying real pressure rather than empty threats. From the shadows, Otis Grady stepped forward, studying Amelia with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She's lying, he said flatly. Amelia's heart stopped. Excuse me. You heard me. Grady's cold eyes narrowed. Woman like you doesn't walk away from a man like Bennett over a land dispute. You're stalling, buying time for something. I don't know what you're implying, Mr. Grady, Amelia said, forcing calm into her voice, even as panic clawed up her throat. I came here of my own accord to discuss. Bennett's outside, isn't he? Grady's voice hardened. That's what this is, a distraction. The guard at the door suddenly straightened, peering out into the darkness. Boss, I think he's right. I heard something out by the warehouse door exploded inward. Cole hit the guard nearest the entrance with the full force of his shoulder, sending the man sprawling, while Jasper and the two other ranch hands poured in behind him, rifles raised. Chaos erupted. Caldwell's second guard raised his weapon, but Cole's rifle was already leveled at his chest. Drop it! Now! The man's hands shook as he lowered the weapon, slowly dropping it to the floor. Grady, however, moved with the sudden speed of a cornered animal, lunging toward Amelia and seizing her arm, pulling her against him as a shield. Nobody move! Grady snarled, a pistol appearing in his free hand, pressed against Amelia's side. Or the woman pays for it. The room went deathly still. Let her go, Grady. Cole said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, rifle steady despite the fury burning behind his eyes. This ends now one way or another. You think I spent 30 years planning to reclaim what's mine, just to walk away because you found a few scraps of paper and a scared clerk? Grady's grip tightened on Amelia's arm, and she bit back a cry of pain. That land was mine before your father ever set foot on it. Mine, and some clerical technicality stole it away. That land belongs to whoever built something real on it, Cole said. My father spent his life turning nothing into something. You spent 30 years nursing a grudge and forging documents. That's the difference between us, Grady, and it's why you're about to lose. Am I? Grady's laugh was cold and humorless. I've got the only thing you actually care about pressed against a pistol right now, Bennett. Seems to me I'm holding all the cards. Cole, Amelia said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear coursing through her. Don't you dare do anything reckless. I trust you. Cole's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a silent communication built on weeks of shared danger and hard-won trust. "I know," Cole said quietly. Then louder to Grady, "Let her go and I'll make sure the court hears you cooperated. Fight this and I promise you'll hang for kidnapping on top of everything else." Grady's resolve flickered calculation, warring with desperation behind his eyes. It was in that moment of hesitation that the warehouse door burst open a second time, revealing Sheriff Danby with 3 deputies at his back, rifles already raised. "Drop the weapon, Grady," Danby ordered. "It's over." Grady's eyes darted around the room, taking in the armed lawman, the ranch hand's Cole's unwavering rifle, and finally understanding with sickening clarity that he had run out of options. His grip on Amelia loosened. She wrenched free the moment his hand slackened, stumbling toward Cole, who caught her, instantly pulling her behind him with fierce protectiveness. Grady's pistol clattered to the floor as the deputies swarmed him, wrestling him into restraints despite his furious protests. Caldwell, who had gone pale and silent throughout the entire confrontation, made a feeble attempt to slip toward a side exit, only to find Jasper blocking his path with an expression that dared him to try. "Henry Caldwell," Danby said, striding forward with grim satisfaction. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, arson, and kidnapping. Anything you say from here on out, I'd advise choosing carefully." Reed's wife and daughter were freed and comforted the little girl, clinging to her mother in tears of relief, while Reed himself wept openly, overwhelmed with gratitude and shame in equal measure. Amelia stood wrapped in Cole's arms amid the chaos of arrests and reunions, her whole body trembling now that the danger had finally passed. "You scared 10 years off my life," Cole murmured into her hair. "Walking in there like that. I told you I trusted you to protect me," Amelia said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You did." "Barely," Cole admitted. "If Grady had—" "He didn't," Amelia said firmly, pulling back to look up at him. "Because you came through that door exactly when I needed you to. Just like you did that first night at the station." Cole's expression softened, 3 years of grief and weeks of hard-fought hope, both visible in the tenderness of his gaze. "Seems to be a habit of mine," he said quietly. "Showing up right when you need someone most." "I hope it stays that way," Amelia whispered, "for a long time to come." Sheriff Danby approached, his expression grim but satisfied. "We've got Caldwell, Grady, and enough evidence between the forged documents, Silas's testimony, and tonight's kidnapping charge to ensure neither of them sees daylight outside a cell for a long while." "What about the land claims?" Cole asked. "The forged marriage document, the boundary dispute." "Dead in the water," Danby confirmed. "Fraud invalidates everything they filed. Your titles secure Bennett. Has been all along, truth be told. Grady's old claim never held water once the residency requirement lapsed. That's settled law, not some technicality a judge can overturn on Grady's say-so, especially not from behind bars." Relief washed over Cole's face. 3 years of quiet fear about the ranch's future finally truly settled. But as the deputies led Caldwell and Grady away in restraints, Grady turned back one final time, his cold eyes fixing on Amelia with a hatred that made her shiver despite Cole's protective arms around her. "This isn't over," Grady called out. "Men like Caldwell and me, we've got friends, judges, money that reaches further than some frontier sheriff's jurisdiction. You think a few arrests end this?" "Get him out of here," Danby ordered, and the deputies hauled Grady away before he could say more. But his words lingered in the warehouse long after he'd gone, settling over Amelia and Cole, like a shadow neither of them could quite shake. "He's bluffing," Cole said, though his voice carried less certainty than his words intended. "Desperate men say desperate things." "Maybe," Amelia said softly. "But Cole, what if he's not? What if this isn't truly over?" Cole pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead with fierce protective tenderness. "Then we face whatever comes next the same way we faced tonight," he said. "Together. Whatever Grady's friends might try, they'll find the same thing he did, that you and I don't break easy, not for men who'd rather steal and lie than earn what's theirs, honestly. Amelia held on to that promise as they finally rode back toward the ranch beneath a sky just beginning to lighten with the first gray hints of dawn. The immediate danger passed, but Grady's parting threat still echoing uneasily in the back of her mind. A warning that the fight for their future together might not be as finished as the night's victory had made it feel. Grady's threat proved to have teeth faster than either of them expected. 3 days after the arrests, a telegram arrived at the ranch addressed to Cole, and Margaret's face went tight with worry the moment she read the sender's name. "It's from a lawyer's office in Cheyenne," she said, handing it over. "Firm called Ashworth and Pike." Cole read it once, then again, his expression darkening with each pass. "They're representing Grady," he said. "Filed an emergency motion to stay all proceedings against him, claiming the arrest itself was unlawful. Says Danby overstepped his jurisdiction, bringing federal deputies from the territorial marshal's office into what should have been a local matter." "Can they actually do that?" Amelia asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "Legally, I don't know. But if they can drag this into a jurisdictional fight, it buys Grady time. Maybe enough time to make bail, maybe enough to have the whole case thrown out on a technicality." Cole set the telegram down heavily. Man wasn't bluffing about having friends with money. Margaret's mouth pressed into a thin line. How deep do these friends go? Deep enough to hire a Cheyenne law firm within 3 days of an arrest in a frontier town most of them have probably never set foot in. Cole rubbed a hand over his tired eyes. "I need to talk to Danby." Sheriff Danby's office was crowded that afternoon. The sheriff himself, looking older than Amelia remembered, from just days before a stack of legal paperwork spread across his desk like an accusation. "They're good," Danby admitted grimly. "Ashworth and Pike don't take cases unless they smell money at the other end of them, and they're arguing procedural grounds that might actually hold up if this reaches a territorial judge unfriendly to our side." "So Grady walks," Cole said flatly. "Not walks exactly. But he might make bail while the jurisdictional question gets sorted, and that bail's going to be set by a judge who owes his appointment to men with exactly the kind of connections Grady's apparently got." Amelia felt sick. "You mean the same corrupt Judge Caldwell was planning to use against Cole's land claim?" "Possibly the very same," Danby confirmed. "Territories smaller than folks like to admit. Corruption tends to travel in the same small circles." "Then what do we do?" Cole demanded. "Just wait and hope the law sorts itself out fair while Grady sits in some hotel room in Cheyenne plotting his next move?" Danby leaned back, exhaustion evident in every line of his weathered face. "We build the strongest case we possibly can fast as we can, and we make sure it's airtight enough that no jurisdictional argument or bought judge can make it disappear. That means Reed's testimony, Silas's confession, the forged documents, all of it presented, clean and unshakable before Grady's lawyers can muddy the waters. And if that's not enough, then we fight harder," Danby said simply. "Because giving up isn't an option, not with a man like Grady still out there believing he's owed something that was never rightfully his." The following weeks passed in a tense blur of depositions and legal preparation, Amelia and Cole spending long hours at the sheriff's office and later at a makeshift legal office set up by a territorial prosecutor sent out from the capital to handle what had quickly become a case of significant public interest. Reed's confession, given now without the shadow of his family's safety hanging over him, proved devastatingly thorough dates, amounts, every forged document meticulously described, and cross-referenced against the physical evidence already gathered. "You've done more good today than you realize," the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed young man named Elias Ford, told Reed after a particularly grueling session. "Testimony like yours is exactly what turns a shaky case into an unbreakable one." Reed managed a tired, grateful smile, the first Amelia had seen from him since the kidnapping. "Just trying to make right what I helped make wrong." Silas Grubb's testimony, delivered from behind bars, where he awaited his own lesser charges, corroborated every detail of the boundary marker scheme, painting a clear picture of Grady's decades-long obsession with reclaiming land he believed had been stolen from him through nothing more than an unfortunate residency technicality 30 years prior. "He talked about it all the time," Silas admitted. Said his daddy told him stories his whole life about the land that should have been theirs. Said reclaiming it was practically a holy mission, far as Grady saw it. Obsession makes men reckless, Ford noted, jotting details into his file. Reckless men leave trails. We just need enough of that trail documented before his lawyers finish arguing about jurisdiction. It was during one of these long evenings of preparation, walking home from the makeshift legal office as dusk settled over Red Hollow, that Cole finally voiced something that had clearly been weighing on him for days. "I want to marry you," he said so suddenly that Amelia nearly stumbled. "Cole, I know the timing's terrible." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression a mixture of nervous determination and raw sincerity. "We've got a trial hanging over us, a man out there who's already tried to kidnap innocent people to get what he wants, and here I am proposing marriage in the middle of all of it." "Cole, but I've been thinking about it since that night in the warehouse." He continued, unable to stop now that he'd started. "Watching Grady hold that pistol against you, understanding in that moment exactly how much I stood to lose, if things went wrong, it made everything else feel small by comparison. The land dispute, the trial, even Caldwell's schemes. None of it matters half as much as making sure you know exactly how I feel, exactly what I want for our future, regardless of whatever uncertainty is still hanging over us." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, though these carried none of the grief that had marked so many of her tears since arriving in Red Hollow. "Ask me properly then," she said, a watery smile breaking through. Cole's answering smile was the widest she'd ever seen from him, 3 years of careful restraint finally giving way entirely to open, unguarded joy. He knelt right there on the dusty road, taking her hand in both of his. "Amelia Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident beneath it. "You came into my life on the worst day either of us could have imagined, and somehow, impossibly, you've made every day since better than the one before. I don't have much to offer beyond a ranch that's currently tangled up in a legal fight, and a heart that took 3 years to learn how to love again. But everything I do have, I want to share with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Amelia said, immediately pulling him up and into her arms before he'd even finished rising. "Yes, Cole. 1,000 times yes." Margaret's reaction when they shared the news that evening was exactly what Amelia had come to expect from the sharp-tongued, warm-hearted woman who had become something like family over the past 2 months. "Well, it's about time," Margaret said, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Watch the two of you dancing around each other for weeks. Thought I might have to lock you both in the pantry until you sorted it out yourselves." "Margaret?" Cole started, embarrassed. "Don't you Margaret me, Cole Bennett. I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, and I have never seen you look at anyone the way you look at this woman. Not even—" She stopped herself, glancing briefly at Amelia. "Well, not in a long while anyway." The unspoken reference to Sarah hung gently in the air, but rather than causing pain, it felt for the first time like something that could exist alongside their happiness, rather than in opposition to it. "I think Sarah would be glad," Amelia said quietly, taking a risk she hadn't quite planned, "that you found someone to build a life with again." Cole's breath caught, but the smile that followed was soft and grateful rather than pained. "I think she would too," he said. "She always did tell me I was too stubborn to let go of things even when letting go was exactly what I needed." The moment settled into something warm and healing. 3 years of grief finally finding its rightful place, not forgotten, not erased, but folded gently into a new chapter neither Cole nor Sarah could have anticipated, and one that honored rather than betrayed what had come before. The wedding, they decided, would wait until after the trial concluded a practical decision as much as a symbolic one, neither of them wanting Grady's shadow hanging over what should be an entirely joyful occasion. But the trial itself arrived faster than expected, the territorial prosecutor pushing hard against Grady's stalling tactics until a court date was finally set barely 3 weeks after Cole's proposal. The morning of the trial dawned clear and bright, an almost cruel contrast to the tension coiled tight in Amelia's stomach as she dressed with careful, trembling hands. "You don't have to testify if it's too much," Cole said, gently watching her from the doorway. Ford said Reed's testimony alone might be enough. I need to testify, Amelia said firmly. Grady used me from the very first night, Cole. Manipulated my desperation, my vulnerability as part of some scheme that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with land he believed was owed to him. I want the judge to hear exactly how calculated that was. Cole crossed the room, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. Then I'll be right there beside you, he said, every step of the way. The courtroom was packed, word of the trial having spread far beyond Red Hollow to draw curious onlookers from across the territory, all eager to witness the downfall of two men who had spent months terrorizing innocent townsfolk with their schemes. Henry Caldwell sat pale and diminished at the defendant's table, his once oily confidence entirely stripped away by weeks in a jail cell and the mounting evidence against him. Otis Grady, by contrast, sat with his chin lifted defiant. Even now, his expensive Cheyenne lawyers whispering strategy in his ear as the judge called the proceedings to order. Judge Harmon Pruitt, brought in specifically from the territorial capital, rather than trusting the case to any local judge who might be susceptible to Grady's connections, surveyed the courtroom with sharp, unimpressed eyes that suggested he had little patience for procedural games. Let's proceed, he said. Prosecution may call its first witness. Reed's testimony came first, delivered with the quiet dignity of a man determined to make right what he'd been forced into wronging. Grady's lawyers attacked his credibility relentlessly, painting him as an unreliable witness motivated by self-preservation, but Reed held firm through every cross-examination, his account never wavering from the physical evidence already presented. Silas Grubb's testimony followed, corroborating the boundary marker scheme in devastating detail, and even Grady's expensive lawyers struggled to poke meaningful holes in an account backed by physical evidence recovered directly from the crime scene. Then Elias Ford called Amelia to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her chin lifted, refusing to let the weight of dozens of curious stares shake her resolve, catching Cole's steady gaze from the front row as she settled into her seat. Miss Carter, Ford began gently, can you describe your first encounter with Mr. Grady? Amelia recounted that first night at the train station, Grady's inappropriate advances, his crude proposition, the way his demeanor had shifted the moment Cole intervened. Did Mr. Grady ever indicate at that time that he recognized Mr. Bennett or held any particular interest in his property? Not explicitly, but looking back, his reaction to Cole's arrival was different from simple frustration at being interrupted. There was something almost calculating in how quickly he backed down and left. Grady's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his tone carefully condescending. Miss Carter, isn't it true that you arrived in this territory with the express intention of marrying a wealthy rancher, only to transfer your affections to a second wealthy rancher within a matter of days after discovering your intended husband had died? Objection, Ford said sharply. Counsel is mischaracterizing the witness's circumstances. I'll allow the question, Judge Pruitt said, though his tone carried a note of distaste. But counsel would do well to remember this witness is not the one on trial. Amelia met the lawyer's condescending gaze without flinching. I arrived believing I was traveling toward a future built on honest correspondence with a man who, as far as I knew, wanted a genuine partnership, she said clearly. I discovered upon arrival that he had died through no scheme or fault of my own. Mr. Bennett offered me shelter and honest work, with no expectation of anything beyond that. Whatever grew between us afterward grew from genuine affection, not calculation. I'd ask you not to conflate the two simply because it serves your client's defense. A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom gallery, and even Judge Pruitt's stern expression softened slightly with something like respect. The lawyer, sensing he'd gained no ground, shifted tactics. Isn't it true, Miss Carter, that you personally benefited from Mr. Grady's arrest and Mr. Caldwell's exposure? That removing my client from the picture directly protects the property you now stand to inherit through your engagement to Mr. Bennett? I benefit from living free of threats, forged documents, arson, and kidnapping, Amelia said, her voice sharpening. If you're suggesting I fabricated a scheme spanning arson, forgery, and the abduction of an innocent woman and child purely to protect land, I have no legal claim to whatsoever. I'd ask you to present actual evidence of that theory, rather than simply implying it, because the truth doesn't favor your client." The lawyer had no response to that, and Judge Pruitt's barely concealed smirk suggested he found the exchange as satisfying as the gallery clearly did. The trial's final devastating blow came from an unexpected source, a woman named Louisa Grady, Otis Grady's estranged sister, who had traveled from Cheyenne specifically to testify against her own brother. "I haven't spoken to Otis in nearly 15 years, she told the courtroom, her voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of the admission. "But when I read about this trial in the territorial newspaper, about the scheme he'd built, the people he'd hurt, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer." "Can you tell the court about the original land claim your father filed 31 years ago?" Ford asked. "My father was a difficult man," Louisa said carefully. "Filed that claim on a whim, same as he did most things, then abandoned it within months when a better opportunity came along in the Dakota Territory. He never once expressed regret about losing that land. Not to my knowledge, not in the 15 years I lived under his roof afterward." "And your brother's belief that the land was somehow stolen from your family?" "Fabricated," Louisa said flatly. "Grief, I think, twisted into obsession over the years. Our father died broke and bitter about a dozen different failed schemes, and somewhere along the way, Otis decided that ranch was the one that got away, the one that would have made everything different if only he could reclaim it. It was never about justice. It was about resurrecting a fantasy of what our family might have been built on a foundation that never actually existed." Grady's composure finally cracked, his face contorting with fury, as his own sister dismantled the very justification he'd built his entire scheme upon. "You don't know anything about it, Louisa," he snapped, rising from his seat, despite his lawyer's urgent hand on his arm. "You left. You don't know what that land meant to our father, what it should have meant to us." "I know you burned an innocent man's pasture," Louisa said, her voice cracking with grief rather than anger. "I know you kidnapped a woman and her child to force silence from a frightened clerk. I know you held a pistol to an innocent woman's side in a warehouse, all chasing a ghost that never should have haunted you in the first place." Judge Pruitt's gavel cracked sharply against the bench. "Mr. Grady, you will remain seated, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Grady sank back into his chair, jaw clenched, fury and humiliation warring plainly across his face as the courtroom absorbed his sister's devastating testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman's verdict came swift and unambiguous. Guilty on all counts for both Caldwell and Grady: fraud, forgery, arson, and kidnapping charges, carrying sentences that would keep both men behind bars for decades to come. Caldwell wept openly as the verdict was read, his careful composure entirely dissolved. Grady, by contrast, sat in stony, furious silence, refusing to meet anyone's eyes as the deputies moved to escort him from the courtroom. But as he passed the row where Cole and Amelia sat, he paused, straining against the deputy's grip just long enough to speak one final time. "You think this ends it?" he said, his voice low and venomous. "You think a verdict changes what should have been mine? Men like me don't just disappear, Bennett. There's always someone else waiting to finish what I started." "There isn't," Cole said calmly, meeting Grady's furious gaze without flinching. "Because unlike you, I've got something worth protecting that doesn't depend on stolen land or forged papers. I've got people who trust me work I've built honest, and a woman who chose to stay even after everything you threw at her. That's not something you can take, Grady. Not with lawyers, not with lies, not with threats. It's already mine." Grady had no response to that, and the deputies finally succeeded in dragging him from the courtroom, his furious protests fading as the heavy doors swung shut behind him. The courtroom erupted into relieved applause and murmured conversation, the long nightmare of Caldwell and Grady's schemes finally definitively over. Amelia turned into Cole's arms, tears of relief finally spilling freely down her cheeks. "It's over," she whispered. "It's actually over. It's over," Cole confirmed, holding her close amid the celebratory chaos of the courtroom. "Nobody's taking this land, this life, this future from us. Not anymore." The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, difficult dream into something brighter than Amelia had ever dared imagine for herself. Red Hollow, once so quick to judge her with cruel gossip, transformed almost overnight into a community eager to celebrate the woman who had helped expose a fraud scheme that had threatened dozens of families across the territory, not merely her own circumstances. Mrs. Pratchett, the boarding house owner, brought over a basket of preserves as an apology for the whispers Amelia had once overheard outside her establishment. The same women who had once gossiped cruelly at the general store now greeted her with warm smiles and genuine admiration. Funny how quickly people's opinions change once the truth comes out. Margaret observed one afternoon watching from the porch as yet another neighbor stopped by to offer congratulations on the upcoming wedding. "I don't need their approval," Amelia said, though there was no real bitterness in it. "But I won't pretend it doesn't feel good after everything." "You earned it," Margaret said firmly. "Every bit of respect this town's finally showing you, you earned through action, not birthright or connection. That's worth more than any easy welcome ever could have been." Reed's family, reunited and finally safe, stopped by the ranch one final time before relocating to a fresh start in a neighboring county, away from any lingering shadow of Caldwell and Grady's schemes. "I don't know how to thank you properly," Reed told Cole and Amelia, his wife and daughter standing close beside him. "You saved my family, risked everything to do it. You showed real courage coming forward the way you did," Cole said. "Takes more strength than most men have admitting wrongdoing and setting it right even when it cost you dearly." "Where will you go?" Amelia asked. "Laramie, we think. Fresh start. Away from the memories of what nearly happened here." Reed's wife squeezed his hand, gratitude and relief evident in her tired but hopeful smile. "We'll never forget what you both did for us, though." "Right when you're settled," Amelia said, embracing the woman warmly. "We'd love to know you're thriving." It was on a quiet evening nearly a month after the trial's conclusion, the ranch finally settled into peaceful rhythm once more, that Cole found Amelia in the garden she had cultivated over the past several months, tending to vegetables that had grown from careful seeds into flourishing established plants. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, watching her work. "How much can grow in just a few months' time given the right care and patience?" Amelia looked up, understanding immediately that he wasn't only talking about the garden. "It is," she agreed softly. Cole settled onto the ground beside her, watching her hands work the soil with the same gentle care she'd brought to every aspect of ranch life since that first desperate night at the train station. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Sarah, about the years I spent afterward, so convinced I wasn't allowed to want anything more that loving again would somehow betray what we'd built together." Amelia set down her trowel, giving him her full attention. "And what do you think now?" "I think Sarah would have hated watching me waste away out here alone, punishing myself for surviving something that was never my fault to begin with." Cole's voice carried a quiet, hard-won peace. "I think she'd have wanted exactly this, someone who could bring warmth back into this house, who could remind me what it feels like to build a future instead of just mourning a past." "I never wanted to replace her," Amelia said gently. "I hope you know that." "I know," Cole said. "You never tried to. You just showed me patiently that there was room for something new without erasing what came before. That's a gift I don't think I properly thanked you for." He reached into his coat pocket, producing a small, simple ring that caught the last light of the setting sun. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "Simple, nothing fancy. But it's been waiting for the right hand for longer than I ever expected it would." Amelia's breath caught as he slid the ring onto her finger, the weight of it settling with a rightness that felt like coming home after a very long journey. "I love you, Amelia Carter," Cole said softly. "Not because you rescued me from grief, and not because I rescued you from that station platform. I love you because somewhere between those two broken people finding each other, we built something neither of us could have managed alone." "I love you too," Amelia whispered, tears of pure joy sliding down her cheeks for the first time since she could remember. "More than I ever thought possible after everything I lost getting here." Their wedding, when it finally came, was a modest affair by the standards of the fine Virginia society Amelia had once known, but it overflowed with a warmth and genuine community that no amount of wealth or status could have purchased. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while simultaneously scolding anyone who dared comment on her tears. Jasper served as an enthusiastic, if slightly clumsy, best man, and the entire ranch crew turned out in their finest clothes to celebrate the union of the two people who had brought their household through such devastating trials into a future finally free of danger. Even Sheriff Danby attended, along with Elias Ford, both men having grown genuinely fond of the couple throughout the exhausting months of the trial's preparation. Standing before the small gathering exchanging vows beneath the wide Wyoming sky, Amelia found herself thinking back to that devastating moment on the train platform, to the station master's gentle but crushing words, to the despair she'd felt, believing her entire future had collapsed in a single sentence. She had been so certain in that moment that everything worth having had been stolen from her. She hadn't yet understood that sometimes the life you plan for isn't the life you're meant to have, and that the truest, most lasting kind of love rarely arrives exactly as expected, but instead emerges quietly, patiently from the wreckage of what you thought you wanted, revealing itself only once you're brave enough to let it. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said, and Cole's kiss, warm and certain and full of promise, sealed a future neither of them could have imagined on that terrible day, months before, when a train had pulled away, leaving nothing behind but dust, silence, and a woman who believed she had lost everything. She hadn't lost everything. She had simply been waiting without knowing it to find exactly where she was always meant to belong. The reception spilled out from beneath a canopy of string lanterns Jasper had rigged between two fence posts, and for the first time in longer than Amelia could remember, laughter filled the air around her, without a single trace of judgment hiding underneath it. "To the bride and groom," Sheriff Danby said, raising a glass of cider high enough for the whole gathering to see, "who survived more trouble in 2 months than most folks see in a lifetime, and came out the other side stronger for it." The crowd cheered, and Amelia felt Cole's hand tighten around hers, warm and steady. "Feels strange," she admitted quietly, leaning into him as the celebration continued around them. "Being celebrated by the same people who once whispered about me outside the general store." "People change their minds when they see the truth clear enough," Cole said. "Doesn't erase what they said before. But it means something that they're willing to admit they were wrong." "It does," Amelia agreed, watching Mrs. Pratchett dance an enthusiastic off-rhythm reel with one of the ranch hands. "I just hope it lasts." She didn't know yet how quickly that hope would be tested. The messenger arrived just past midnight, long after most of the guests had gone home, when only Margaret Jasper and a handful of the closest ranch hands remained to help clean up the last of the celebration. Cole met the rider at the edge of the property, recognizing him as one of Danby's deputies, even in the low lantern light. "This better be good news," Cole said, given the hour. The deputy's grim expression told him otherwise before a single word was spoken. Grady's lawyers filed an emergency appeal an hour before the trial verdict was even finalized, the deputy said, breathless from hard riding. Sheriff figured it wouldn't amount to much, but the territorial court granted a stay on transport tonight pending review. Grady was supposed to be moved to the federal prison in Cheyenne first thing tomorrow morning. Supposed to be. Cole's stomach dropped. There was a fire in the holding cells around 11 o'clock. Small contained fast, but it created enough chaos that Grady slipped his restraints during the confusion. Sheriff thinks he had help planning it, somebody on the inside, maybe a bribed guard. He's loose, Cole said flatly. Danby's got every available man searching the town and the roads leading out. But Grady's had almost an hour's head start, and he knows this territory better than half the men chasing him. Amelia had come up quietly behind Cole in time to hear the last of it, her face draining of color. "He's coming here," she said with a certainty that made both men turn to look at her. "Isn't he? This is exactly the kind of thing he'd do, use his last free hours to finish what he started." "We don't know that," the deputy said, though his tone lacked conviction. "We don't need to know it," Cole said grimly, already moving toward the house. We need to prepare for it. Jasper, wake the others. Bar every door and window. Nobody rides out alone tonight." The ranch transformed within minutes from a place of joyful celebration into something braced for siege. Lanterns extinguished except where absolutely necessary, every man armed and positioned at a window or door. Margaret moving through the house with a shotgun cradled against her hip as naturally as she'd once carried a mixing bowl. "You should be upstairs," Cole told Amelia, checking the rifle in his hands for the third time in as many minutes. "Somewhere safer than the main floor." "I'm not hiding," Amelia said, echoing words she'd spoken to him weeks earlier, in what felt now like an entirely different lifetime. "Not on my wedding night. Not from a man who's already lost." "He's dangerous precisely because he's already lost everything," Cole said. "A man with nothing left to protect is a man with nothing left to lose either. That makes him more dangerous, not less. All the more reason you shouldn't be facing him without me watching your back." Cole studied her for a long moment, torn between the fierce need to protect her and the growing understanding that Amelia Carter, now Amelia Bennett, had never once been the kind of woman who could be protected by being shut away. "Stay close," he said finally. "And if I tell you to move, you move. No arguments." Agreed. The hours crept by in tense silence, the household waiting for a threat that refused to announce itself until finally, just as the eastern sky began to gray with the first hint of dawn, a sound broke the stillness. Not hoofbeats this time, but the softer scrape of someone moving carefully along the side of the house. Cole's hand tightened on his rifle. "Kitchen door," he mouthed to Jasper, who nodded and slipped silently toward the back of the house. A shadow passed the front window. Then another sound glass breaking deliberately near the pantry, a distraction Cole realized instantly meant to draw attention away from wherever the real entry point would be. "Back room," Margaret hissed, already moving. But it was too late. The kitchen door burst open, and Otis Grady stood in the doorway, disheveled and wild-eyed, a stolen pistol gripped in a hand that trembled with equal parts exhaustion and fury. "Evening, Bennett," Grady said, his voice hoarse and ragged. "Congratulations on the wedding. Shame I couldn't attend." "Drop the weapon, Grady," Cole said, rifle already raised and steady despite his racing heart. "You're already facing decades behind bars. Adding an armed break-in and threats against my family won't help your case." "My case is already finished," Grady said bitterly. "Judge Pruitt made sure of that. 30 years of planning gone because some frightened clerk and a woman who should have minded her own business decided to play hero." His eyes fixed on Amelia with a hatred that made her skin crawl. "This is your fault. If you'd just taken Caldwell's offer, lied about the confession like he asked." "I'd never lie to protect a man who burned innocent land and kidnapped a child," Amelia said, forcing steel into her voice, despite the fear coiling tight in her chest. "You did this to yourself, Mr. Grady. Every choice, every scheme, every threat, that was you, not me." "Careful," Grady snarled, the pistol swinging toward her. "You're the reason I'm standing in this kitchen instead of halfway to Canada by now. Don't test what little patience I've got left." "Grady." Cole's voice dropped low, dangerous. "You point that weapon at my wife again, and I promise you won't leave this house standing." "Big talk from a man who's already got a rifle aimed at my chest," Grady said, though something in his voice had begun to waver. Exhaustion and desperation eroding whatever remained of his earlier confidence. "What's stopping me from ending this right now? I've got nothing left to lose." "Because deep down you're not a killer," Amelia said, suddenly, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "A killer doesn't spend 30 years chasing paperwork and legal technicalities. A killer doesn't hire other men to do his burning and his threatening for him. You wanted that land, Mr. Grady, not blood. And killing us tonight only guarantees you'll never see freedom again, not even the faint hope of an appeal." Grady's hand trembled harder, the pistol wavering as her words found their target. "You don't know anything about what I want," he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "I know you're standing in a house full of armed men, exhausted, cornered with a sheriff's posse, likely closing in on this property within the hour." Amelia continued, pressing her advantage carefully. I know that whatever happens in the next few minutes will determine whether you spend the rest of your life in prison or the rest of your life, however short that might be, as a fugitive who murdered a woman and her husband on their wedding night. Neither future is one you actually chose 30 years ago, when this all supposedly began overland. Your own sister just told an entire courtroom your father never even wanted. Shut up, Grady said, but weakly now, his composure crumbling visibly. You've lost Mr. Grady, Cole said quietly. The land, the trial, your freedom, all of it already lost, regardless of what happens in the next 60 seconds. The only choice left to you is whether you lose it, having harmed more innocent people, or whether you walk out of here in restraints with at least the smallest shred of dignity intact. The kitchen fell into a taut, trembling silence. Grady's pistol still raised, but shaking now with obvious exhaustion, his eyes darting between Cole's steady rifle and Amelia's unflinching gaze, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Then, from outside, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses arriving fast, followed by Sheriff Danby's voice booming across the yard. Bennett, we tracked him to your property. Everyone all right in there? Grady's face crumpled with the final understanding that his last desperate gamble had failed entirely. The pistol slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering uselessly to the kitchen floor. It's over, he whispered, sinking into a nearby chair, all the fight finally drained out of him. 30 years and it's just over. Cole kept the rifle trained on him, regardless, unwilling to trust the sudden surrender until Danby and his deputies burst through the door moments later, quickly securing Grady in restraints once more. You all right? Danby asked, scanning the room with obvious relief at finding everyone unharmed. We're fine, Cole said, finally lowering his rifle, his arm trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. Thanks to Amelia mostly. Talked him down better than I ever could have. Amelia sank into Cole's arms the moment the deputies led Grady away, her entire body shaking with the delayed terror of everything that had just happened. On our wedding night, she said, half laughing, half crying with the absurdity of it. Of course something like this would happen on our wedding night. Seems fitting in a strange way, Cole said, holding her close, his own relief evident in the unsteady rhythm of his breathing. Every difficult thing we've faced together. Why should tonight be any different? Grady's escape attempt, rather than earning him any further leniency, resulted in additional charges that all but guaranteed he would never again see freedom. The territorial court, moving swiftly to ensure his transport to federal prison, happened under maximum security, with no further opportunities for bribery or manipulation. Caldwell, watching his former partner's final, desperate gambit collapse so completely from his own cell, reportedly broke down entirely, cooperating fully with prosecutors in hopes of the smallest possible reduction to his own sentence. It's truly finished this time, Danby confirmed a week later, stopping by the ranch to deliver the news personally. Both men transported under heavy guard, no possibility of appeal, no lingering legal complications hanging over your land or your marriage. Thank you, Cole said, shaking the sheriff's hand with genuine gratitude. For everything. We couldn't have gotten through any of this without you. You two did most of the hard work yourselves, Danby said. Just glad it's finally over so this territory can get back to being the kind of place decent folks want to build a life in. The months that followed unfolded with a peace so complete, it sometimes still caught Amelia by surprise, waking each morning beside Cole with no looming threat, no forged documents, no shadow of danger hanging over their future. The ranch flourished under their combined care. Cole's steady management paired with Amelia's growing knowledge of the land, the animals, the rhythms of frontier life she'd once known nothing about, but had come to love with her whole heart. Margaret remained a fixture in the household, her sharp wit and warm heart continuing to anchor the family through every small joy and minor crisis that came with running a working ranch. Jasper eventually married a young woman from town, moving into a small cabin on the property, with Cole's blessing the ranch slowly growing into something larger than any of them had originally imagined. Not just a business, but a genuine community built on trust, earned through fire, both literal and figurative. Never thought I'd see the day this place felt this alive, Margaret said one evening, watching from the porch as Amelia chased a particularly stubborn chicken across the yard, laughing freely in a way that would have seemed impossible during those first desperate days after her arrival. Feels like a real home now. Not just a ranch a grieving man was hiding inside of. It is a real home, Cole said, settling beside her, his eyes never leaving Amelia. Has been since the day she walked through that door. Nearly a year after that terrible afternoon at the train station, Amelia found herself sitting once again on the porch steps, though this time for an entirely different reason. Her hands pressed gently against a gently rounded belly that had just that morning been confirmed by the doctor from the neighboring county. "You're certain?" Cole asked, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief that made Amelia's heart swell. "Certain?" she confirmed, laughing at the way he immediately knelt beside her, hands hovering as though afraid to touch her too firmly. "We're going to have a baby, Cole." For a long moment, he said nothing at all, simply staring at her with an expression of such profound joy that Amelia felt tears prick at her own eyes. "I never thought," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "After losing Sarah, after everything that followed, I never let myself imagine this. A family, a child of my own." "Well, you'd best start imagining it," Amelia said softly, "because come next spring, this house is going to be a great deal louder than it's ever been." Cole laughed, pure and unguarded, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to her belly, then to her lips, each one carrying a promise more certain than any he'd spoken before. "I love you," he said, "more than I ever thought I'd allow myself to love anyone again." "I love you too," Amelia said. "And I'm endlessly grateful that a train left me stranded on that platform all those months ago, because it led me exactly here." Then their daughter was born the following April, arriving during a gentle spring rain, rather than the harsh blizzard that had once claimed so much from Cole, a detail Margaret pointed out with tearful satisfaction as she helped deliver the newest member of the Bennett family. "Seems like the universe finally decided to give this family some kindness in the weather department," Margaret said, placing the newborn girl carefully into Amelia's exhausted but radiant arms. "What should we name her?" Amelia asked, looking up at Cole, who stood beside the bed with an expression of such complete wonder that he seemed momentarily unable to speak at all. "Grace," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Because that's exactly what she is. Grace, after everything this family has survived to reach this moment." "Grace Bennett," Amelia repeated softly, testing the name against her daughter's tiny sleeping face. "I think that's perfect." Years later, when travelers passed through Red Hollow and asked about the town's history, they would often hear some version of the story that had once scandalized and later inspired the entire community. The tale of a woman abandoned at the train station, left with nothing but a wedding dress meant for a dead man, and the quiet rancher who had refused to ride past her suffering. They would hear about the schemes and forgeries that had once threatened to tear apart everything the Bennett family had built about a corrupt land agent and a bitter, obsessed man who had let 30 years of grievance curdle into something dangerous and destructive. And they would hear, too, about how all of it had ultimately failed against two people who had chosen honesty over deception, courage over fear, and love over the safety of remaining alone with old grief. Amelia herself, now a respected figure throughout Red Hollow, for the courage she'd shown during the trial and the years of steady kindness she'd offered the community, since often found herself thinking back to that devastating afternoon on the train platform, whenever life presented new challenges. A difficult calving season, a harsh winter, the ordinary struggles of raising 3 children who had followed after Grace in the years since. She thought of the young woman she'd been, then certain her entire future had collapsed in a single sentence from a kind but weary station master, convinced that losing Samuel Whitaker meant losing everything worth having in the world. That young woman could never have imagined what actually waited for her beyond that terrible day. She could never have imagined Cole Bennett riding out of the gathering dusk on his dark horse, offering protection to a stranger with no expectation of anything in return. She could never have imagined Margaret's fierce, unwavering loyalty, or Jasper's easy friendship, or the slow, steady way an entire community had transformed from suspicious strangers into genuine family. She could never have imagined standing in a courtroom finding her voice against powerful men who had tried to use her circumstances as a weapon, and discovering in that moment exactly how strong she had become since stepping off that train with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. And she certainly could never have imagined the quiet, profound joy of watching Cole Bennett hold their daughter for the first time, 3 years of grief, finally completely healed by the family they had built together against every obstacle placed in their path. "Mama," Grace said one evening years later, tugging at Amelia's skirt as the family gathered for supper, Cole carving a roast at the head of the table while their younger children argued good-naturedly over whose turn it was to say grace. "Papa says you two met at the train station. Is that true?" Amelia glanced at Cole, who caught her eye with a warm, knowing smile across the busy table. "It's true," she said softly. "Your papa found me there all alone when I thought I'd lost everything in the world worth having." "What happened?" Grace asked, wide-eyed with the particular fascination children hold for stories about their parents' younger lives. Amelia reached across the table, taking Cole's hand in hers. Feeling the same steady warmth she'd felt on that very first night when a stranger had knelt before her on an empty platform and offered 4 words that had changed the entire course of her life. "He told me I wasn't alone," she said. "And he meant it. Every single day since." Cole squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with the same devotion that had carried them both through fire and forgery, through courtrooms and kidnapping, through grief and gossip, and every obstacle a broken world had thrown in their path. "Best decision I ever made," Cole said, "riding up to that station instead of riding on by." Grace grinned, satisfied with the answer, before returning her attention to more pressing matters of supper and siblings, the story already settling into the comfortable mythology every family builds around its own beginning. But for Cole and Amelia, it was never simply a story. It was the truest thing either of them had ever lived. Proof that even when the world takes everything from you, even when trains leave and promises break and cruel men scheme to steal what little remains, love finds its way through anyway. Patient and unshakable, waiting on a dusty platform for exactly the right moment to whisper 4 simple words that change everything. She had been abandoned at the train station, left with nothing but a wedding dress and a broken heart. And in the ashes of that abandonment, she had found something far greater than the future she'd originally traveled west to claim. She had found a home. She had found a family. She had found in a quiet cowboy who refused to ride past a stranger's suffering the one promise that never once broke, that whatever storms came, she would never again face them alone.